I heard a sharp scream, and then a nurse stuck a needle into me. The pain hit me like a wave. My heart beat hard a few times, then just stopped. I couldn't move at all. I thought, am I really going to die? I'm only 17. How can a simple injection kill someone? If I could do it all over, I would be brave, but I felt my life slipping away until everything went dark. Then I heard a crying voice calling, "Master, Master, are you okay?" I opened my eyes slowly. Everything was blurry. I thought I was dead. Was this hell? But I saw a messy-haired little girl looking at me with worry. When she saw me wake up, she cried with joy and ran off to get me water. I looked around. I was in a broken-down straw hut with holes in the roof and sunlight coming through the cracks. None of this made sense. I died from a needle in a hospital, so why could I still feel pain? Who was this girl? She came back with a bowl of water and held it to my lips. I drank without thinking, but suddenly strange memories flooded into my head. The pain was so bad that I blacked out again. Here is what I learned from those memories. My soul had traveled through time and space and entered the body of another person with the same name, Richard. This Richard was the son of a baron in the Dairy Empire. His father had been killed by an enemy arrow in battle not long ago. Richard saw his father die and charged at the enemy to get revenge, but he was badly outnumbered. He got seriously hurt and was only saved because soldiers came to help him. He was sent back to his family's land with the other wounded. His grief was so deep that his soul fell asleep, but his body stayed alive, and that gave my soul a chance to take over. 3 days later, I finally woke up for good. All the memories of this body's original owner had merged with mine. The little girl was sleeping by my bed. I was still very weak, but I felt a fire burning inside me. In my old life, I was a coward. My parents worked far away, and I just went between school and home every day like a puppet, living a dull and empty life. Now fate had given me a second chance. This time, I swore I would live a life truly worth living. I finally accepted that I had really crossed into another world. Lying on that broken wooden bed, I told myself, as long as I can survive, there's still hope. I tried to sit up, but the pain from my wounds was terrible, like a knife twisting inside me. The little girl, G.I.'s, woke up right away and told me not to move. I said I was fine, but then my stomach growled loudly. She rushed out to get me food. When she came back, she handed me a bowl of something black and mushy. It looked awful. She explained it was black bean powder, the only food left in our territory. Since my father took me and 10 soldiers to answer the kingdom's call to war, only old people, women, and children stayed behind. Nobody could hunt, and now even they were gone. My father and all the soldiers had died fighting the orc tribe. I remembered the image of my father being killed by arrows while protecting me, and anger burned inside me. Even though he wasn't my real father, I felt his love through these memories. I swore I would get revenge for the original Richard. I drank the black bean soup, and something strange happened. A warm energy spread through my whole body, reaching every part of me. My wounds started to itch like they were healing. This world's food carried some kind of power, nothing like food from my old world. I drank 2 bowls and felt much stronger. But GIs told me that was the last of our food. I looked at her thin, pale face and knew she wasn't lying. We were in serious trouble. I managed to stand up and walked outside with her help. The village was a mess, a few broken-down houses standing crooked, completely empty and silent like a ghost town. GIs told me, with tears in her eyes, that everyone else had left because there was no food. They were free people, so she couldn't stop them. Now it was just the 2 of us. I went to the weapon storage and found only an axe, a basic bow with arrows, and an old fishing net. I grabbed the net and headed to the small river outside the village. Fishing was easier than hunting, especially with my injuries. I set up the net, beat the water with branches, and soon caught 2 big fish. I made a fire and roasted them. I gave 1 fish to GIs, but she refused, saying it belonged to the Lord. I ordered her to eat it. She hesitated but finally obeyed. Watching her eat, I felt a bit of warmth in my heart. Then I tossed my fish bones aside, and they hit a rock with a strange clang. I picked them up and found something shiny inside the fish's mouth, a ring. A mysterious energy flowed into my mind when I touched it. I pricked my finger and dripped blood onto it. The ring flashed with white light, and suddenly I could feel it like a part of my body. It was a spatial ring, a magic storage item. Inside, the space was about 2 cubic meters. There was a book, a sword, and a wooden chest. I pulled out the chest first. When I opened it, I found 850 gold coins. In this world, 100 copper coins equal 1 silver coin, and 100 silver coins equal 1 gold coin. Just 1 silver coin could buy 10 pounds of black bean powder, which was already considered rich people's food. This was a fortune. I felt a fire of determination. I would use this money to become strong and take revenge. The next morning, I decided to walk to Shuanghe town, about 50 li away, to buy supplies and slaves. Our territory, called One Village Ridge, was a small inherited land. To the south was the river. To the northeast, a vast desert nobody ever returned from. To the northwest, the 10,000 beast forest full of magic creatures. My father used to hunt at its edges and trade pelts for money. GIs and I walked all day. My wounds still ached, but we had no choice. No food meant death, and winter was coming. By evening, we reached the town. It was surrounded by a wooden fence with 2 guards at the gate. They tried to stop us, but when I said I was the lord of One Village Ridge, their attitude changed immediately. They let us through with big smiles. The town was small and plain, low wooden buildings along dirt roads. I went straight to a place I knew from the original Richard's memories, the Eternal Trading Company, one of the Empire's top 10 merchant groups. A middle-aged shopkeeper greeted me warmly. I told him I wanted to buy young male slaves. His face lit up. He had slaves that nobody had bought for over 10 days, and feeding them was costing him money. He led me to the backyard where iron cages held several ragged people. One of them caught my eye right away. It wasn't human. It was a beastman, a dog-headed person, about the same height as a regular man. Dog-headed people are known for their loyalty. Once they accept a master, they will fight to the death for them. I pointed at him immediately and asked, "How much for this one?" The shopkeeper smiled wide and said I had excellent taste. The shopkeeper gave me a crazy high price for the dog-headed beastman. I knew normal beast slaves only cost 1 or 2 gold coins, so he was clearly trying to cheat me. I turned around and started walking out, saying I'd go to the shop across the street instead. That worked. He rushed after me, arms spread wide, blocking my way and begging me to stay. He said we could talk about the price. I told him his offer was way too high and I wasn't interested. He changed his tone fast, calling me a valued customer and promising me a special deal. After some back and forth, he offered me the dog-headed beastman for just 2 gold coins, but only if I bought at least 5 human slaves too. Human slaves were 5 silver coins each. I did the math in my head. I remembered GIs had been bought for only 3 silver coins, so 5 silver for a male slave wasn't too bad. And 2 gold for a beastman was a fair deal. I decided not to haggle anymore and told him I'd take every male slave he had. His eyes lit up. He said he had 15 male slaves in stock. I told him to bring them out so I could check them myself. I wouldn't take anyone old, weak, or sick. He said one had an injured leg, so he'd remove that one. The other 14 were fine. He pulled out his keys and a short knife, just in case any slave tried something desperate before the contract was signed. One by one, the slaves came out of their cages. They were thin as skeletons, with empty eyes, like people who had given up on life completely. All they hoped for was a master who wouldn't beat them. I looked them over. They were all young, at least. The older ones probably hadn't survived the long transport. I said I'd take all 14, plus the dog-headed beastman in the corner cage. The doghead looked up at me for a moment, then dropped its head again. It had been beaten into total submission. The shopkeeper banged on its cage with his knife and yelled at it to stand up. It got to its feet, shaking. I checked it over. No serious injuries. It wasn't very strong looking, but beastmen are tougher than humans anyway. The shopkeeper told me to cut my finger for the contract. I needed to drip blood onto the magic circle on each slave's forehead to bind them to me. I took my father's short knife and cut my fingertip without hesitation. One by one, I pressed my blood onto each slave's forehead. Every time, a white light flashed, and I felt a faint mental connection form between us. After finishing with all 14 human slaves, I went to the dog-headed beastman. The moment my blood touched its forehead, a much stronger flash of light burst out, far brighter than any of the human contracts. I felt dizzy and almost lost my balance. This beastman was clearly more powerful than the humans. Luckily, its strength wasn't enough to cause a dangerous backlash against me, or things could have gone very wrong. After all 15 slave contracts were done, The new marks on their necks glowed with a faint blue light. The whole deal cost me 9 gold coins, and the shopkeeper, whose name was Friesmill, he told me to call him Mill, was grinning from ear to ear. He led me into the main shop. It was a small place, maybe 60 square meters, but packed with all kinds of goods. Pots and pans on the left, weapons on the right. My eyes went straight to the blades. In a world full of monsters and bandits, weapons were a must. I picked up a black short sword with fine hammer marks on the blade. Mill said it was forged by a first-rank old blacksmith using refined iron. No magic, but top quality. He wanted 80 silver coins for it. I wasn't going to pay that. I told him it looked like an ordinary iron sword to me, and that there were 7 or 8 blacksmith shops in town where I could probably find something just as good. I said his price would scare away a long-term customer like me. He got nervous and tried to prove the sword's quality. He grabbed it, walked to a thick elm post by the door, and chopped it with a loud yell. The blade cut deep into the wood without a single chip. I had to admit the sword was good, but I didn't show it. I slapped it on the counter and said my price was 70 silver. Take it, or I'd walk across the street to the Black Edge weapon shop. I turned to leave. He jumped in front of me and agreed to 70 silver. I told him to prepare 15 swords of the same quality, each with a good leather sheath. That order came to 9.8 gold coins, which made his frown disappear fast. Next, I went to the food section. There were 3 kinds of grain on the shelves: black bean powder in nice cloth bags, which was noble food, rough grass seed powder in clay jars, for commoners and livestock, and at the bottom, a gray, sour-smelling block food covered in tiny holes, slave food. I ordered 1,000 pounds each of black bean powder and grass seed powder. I told Mill the price had to be the lowest in town, or the deal was off. He swallowed hard, then offered 5% below market price and promised to deliver everything to one village ridge by evening. I put 20 gold coins on the counter, 9 for the slaves, 9.8 for the swords, and the remaining 1.2 as a deposit for the grain. I told him I'd pay the rest when the delivery arrived. Mill was all smiles, promising perfect grain and on-time delivery. As I walked out into the hot midday sun and looked at my slaves waiting in the front yard, I felt like I had taken my first real step in this new world. This deal laid the foundation for rebuilding my territory. When I stepped out of the Eternal Trading Company, the sun was already high. My stomach was growling, so I decided to find something to eat. I remembered a food shop nearby from the original Richard's memories. I found the place, a small restaurant called Delicious Food Shop, with a worn wooden sign. Inside it was dim, with a few oil lamps and only 3 or 4 customers eating quietly. A skinny teenage waiter rushed over, wiped down a table by the window, and asked what we wanted. He said they had 2 things, black bean rice and flour fish. I remembered how good the fish tasted, so I ordered 17 portions of each, 1 for every person, including all my slaves. The waiter froze. His eyes went wide. In this world, no master ever shared the same food with slaves. He stammered, asking if I really meant 1 of each for everyone. I nodded, dropped a gold coin on the table, and asked if that was enough. He bit the coin to check it, broke into a huge smile, and ran to the kitchen shouting the order. While waiting, I overheard 2 men at the next table talking in worried voices. They said the war on the northern border was going badly. Our kingdom's army was being beaten back by the orc tribes, and over 5,000 soldiers had already died. The orcs attacked every autumn, but this year was the worst yet. Hearing this made my chest tighten. I had lived through a border battle myself. I knew how fierce and loyal those orcs were. I realized this country was not safe. The war could spread to any northern town, including my territory. But what could I do right now? I had barely solved the food problem. I could only focus on getting stronger. The food arrived. The black bean rice was plump and shiny, and the fish stew smelled incredible. When I took the first bite, that warm energy spread through my body again, just like before. I noticed my slaves didn't seem to feel anything special, which made me wonder if my body was somehow different. I couldn't figure it out, so I just kept eating. What I didn't realize was how much my simple act of sharing the meal meant to the slaves. They had never had a master who let them eat the same food. I could see it in their eyes, gratitude and shock. They silently swore loyalty to me. After eating, I took everyone to a bow shop. The border news made me even more determined to arm up. I picked 5 good crossbows and 100 arrows for each. The price was 5 gold coins per crossbow and 1 silver per arrow, 30 gold coins total. I knew weapon prices from the original Richard's time on the battlefield, so I didn't bother haggling. The deal was fair. But as we walked out onto the street, the town suddenly got loud. A huge crowd of ragged, exhausted people came pouring in from the other end of the road. Young and old, women and crying children, all with fear and despair in their eyes. They were refugees. Before I could react, someone grabbed my leg tightly. My dog-headed beastman moved instantly, pulling out his short sword and pushing the person away, standing guard in front of me. I was impressed. I had only bought him a day ago, but he was already fully committed to protecting me. I stopped the doghead from chasing the man away. I crouched down and looked at him. He was pale and shaking, tears running down his face. He begged me for food, saying he hadn't eaten in 3 days. I told him I'd consider giving him food if he answered my questions. He nodded desperately. He said the northern border had been broken through. The orcs had destroyed their homeland, burning and killing everything. They had no choice but to flee south. As he talked about his destroyed home, he started sobbing. I felt a shock run through me. The border situation was far worse than I thought. The orcs had already broken through the defense line. Just then, I heard the sound of marching boots. A group of armed soldiers in neat uniforms was heading straight toward the refugees. As the sun was setting, I saw soldiers pushing the refugees out of town. Their captain was a huge man named Leo, over 8 feet tall, with a broad sword at his waist and the town's eagle symbol on his chest armor. He was yelling at the refugees, calling them lowlifes, and ordering them to leave. A thin but tough-looking middle-aged man stepped out of the crowd and stood up to Leo. He said they hadn't stolen anything and demanded to know why they were being thrown out. The refugees shouted in agreement. They were citizens of the Dairy Empire too. But Leo pointed at a bruised soldier and said the refugees had beaten a guard and hadn't paid the entry tax. He drew his sword and threatened to beat them out with sticks if they didn't leave on their own. The refugees had nothing but wooden sticks and farm tools. They couldn't fight armed soldiers. Slowly, they backed out through the gate, some crying, some grinding their teeth in anger. Then Leo heard my voice. I called out to him. We knew each other from before. He spun around, and his eyes went wide. He thought I had died at the border. We laughed and hugged. He was an old friend who used to visit my territory often. Now he had been promoted to guard captain, but only because the last captain got 50 lashes for letting refugees into town and was still bedridden. He told me the mayor had given strict orders, no refugees allowed in. I looked at the people outside the walls, sitting on the ground, staring blankly at the sky, holding crying, hungry children. Something didn't feel right. Turning away thousands of desperate people was dangerous. If they gathered in large enough numbers, even a provincial capital couldn't stop them. The mayor must have had some hidden reason for this order. Leo had to rush off to handle more refugees at the south gate. We promised to drink together when things calmed down. After he left, I felt uneasy. The border defeat, the flood of refugees, the mayor's strange orders, it all felt like a net closing in. I looked at my small group. We had swords now and sharp eyes, but this tiny force was nothing against what was coming. I remembered a saying from my old world, power grows from the barrel of a gun. I had started building my armed force, but it was far from enough. I ordered everyone to march back to one village ridge. Along the road, the refugees watched us with wary eyes. They were starving, but they kept their distance. In this world, they knew armed men could kill them without consequence. We reached home after dark. I gave out orders immediately. GIs would lead some slaves to repair the empty houses for future newcomers. The doghead would inspect the warehouse for damage. I would convert the side building next to the main house into a grain storage. After everything was arranged, I stood alone at the village entrance, looking into the distance. The night wind blew sand into my face. I thought about the 2,000 pounds of grain coming my way. It was the foundation for building up my territory. But it was also a piece of meat that could attract unwanted attention. Then I heard the sound of wagon wheels. A convoy appeared in the darkness, led by a cart flying a large banner with gold letters, Eternal Trading Company. My grain had arrived. I gripped the sword at my waist. The grain was secured. Now I needed to figure out how to survive in this chaotic world and turn one village ridge into a real fortress. And those refugees being turned away from town, they might just be my chance to rise. The autumn wind was blowing hard when I saw the convoy coming across the river. 12 wagons with bronze bells clinking, flying the Eternal Trading Company's black and gold banner. I shouted a welcome from the village entrance. Mill the shopkeeper climbed out of the lead wagon himself. He crossed the narrow wooden bridge with steady, light steps. I noticed his palms were covered in calluses, and he had a sword scar on his hand. This man was no ordinary merchant. He knew how to fight. He told me the situation in town had gotten much worse. That afternoon, over 400 refugees armed with farm tools had stormed the south gate. The mayor's guards had to fire 3 rounds of arrows to push them back. Mill had to take a mountain path to avoid trouble on the road. I felt a chill run down my spine. When I left town that morning, there were only about 20 refugees outside the walls. In just a few hours, it had turned into a riot. The workers unloaded the grain quickly and neatly. I had GIs and my dog-headed beastman, whose name was Doleig, count everything and check the quality. Doleig's beast ears kept turning, scanning the area with sharp instincts. After half an hour, GIs confirmed the count was correct. Before leaving, Mill pulled out a small wooden box with a beautiful jade thumb ring inside and gave it to me as a gift. He said he hoped we could do more business in the future. I knew the Eternal Trading Company never gave anything for free. There had to be some calculation behind it. But I smiled, accepted it, and told him to ask if he ever needed my help. After Mill left, I stood in front of the new grain storage in the dark. Doleig was patrolling with 5 slaves, their torches flickering like ghosts in the night. I called him over and told him to stay sharp. This grain was our lifeline for winter, and it would attract wolves. Doleig bared his fangs in the firelight and promised to guard this place like a mother wolf protecting her pups. GIs came to ask about meals. I told her we'd eat grass seed food daily, with black bean rice every 10 days, and meat whenever we caught game. She thought I was being too generous with the slaves, worried it would spoil them. I told her it was like feeding a horse. If you work it without giving it grass, it dies. But if it knows good pasture waits ahead, it will run forever without tiring. She understood and went to tell the others. Alone at my desk, I started drawing a defense plan for the territory by oil lamp. I wanted wooden fences around the village, watchtowers, and trained militia. But then I heard something outside my window. I blew out the lamp and pressed against the wall. In the moonlight, I saw over a dozen shadowy figures creeping along the river toward the bridge. The leader was a big man with a rusty dagger at his waist. Behind him was a thin, wiry fellow they called Skinny Monkey, crawling on the ground like a snake toward the village. The big man whispered to Skinny Monkey to scout ahead carefully. The thin figure vanished into the darkness. My heart was pounding. I quietly drew my short sword and started calculating our chances. Only Doleig could really fight. The 5 slaves were just a thrown-together group with no real combat skills. If it came to a real fight, things would be ugly. Meanwhile, Doleig was patrolling on the east side of the village. His nose twitched. Besides the smell of dirt and dry grass, he picked up the faint sour scent of human sweat, the kind people give off when they're nervous. Something's wrong, he growled quietly, turning his beast ears toward the west side of the village. Right there, behind a broken wall, Skinny Monkey was crouching and staring at our unguarded grain storage with a greedy smile on his face. Late that night, the attack came. GIs burst into my room and told me there were over a dozen bandits outside, and Doleig had already caught one. I grabbed my sword and ran toward the warehouse. On the way, I pulled the long sword from my spatial ring. The moment it hit my hand, I felt a strange power flow through my body. When I reached the warehouse, it was chaos. My slaves were fighting the bandits in the dust and moonlight. I saw one bandit raising his short sword to strike a slave from behind. I charged forward and swung my long sword. It cut right through the bandit's blade, snapping it in half. The broken piece clattered to the ground with sparks flying. The bandit stared at his broken weapon in shock and screamed to his boss that my sword wasn't normal. I was surprised too. I didn't expect the sword from the ring to be this sharp, and my strength felt far greater than I imagined. I realized I couldn't think about this world using my old world logic. Even though this body was only at the warrior apprentice level, it was already much stronger than a normal person. I rushed at another bandit. Same result. One swing, and his sword broke in 2. Their leader's face went white. He knew they couldn't win and yelled for everyone to retreat. I shouted at Doleg and all my slaves to grab bows and crossbows. I warned the bandits that if they took one more step, we would kill them on the spot. But they kept running. I waved my hand, and Doleg fired. His arrow hit the last runner square in the back and went straight through. The man fell face down and didn't move again. The thin scout they called Skinny Monkey collapsed to the ground in terror, shaking all over. I yelled again for everyone to stop or die. Most kept running. My slaves fired more arrows. Screams filled the night. One hit in the leg, another in the hand. That finally stopped them. They were too scared to take another step. I ordered my men to surround them. Doleg was the first to charge out, fast as an arrow, and the others followed. Once the bandits were circled, I walked up slowly and looked them over with cold eyes. "Who are you? Someone answer me, or it won't end well for you." The sight of blood made me feel sick inside, but I kept my face hard. The bandits were shaking, staring at the crossbows pointed at them. They hadn't expected a tiny territory like mine to have such weapons. None of them spoke. They all looked at their big, scarred leader. I pointed right at him. "You? Talk. Who are you and why did you come to my land?" He gritted his teeth, bowed deeply, and said, "My lord, we lost today. Do whatever you want with us." I had already made up my mind. I needed more people for my territory, and these bandits had just delivered themselves to me. By imperial law, everything on my land belonged to me, including uninvited guests. "Then all of you will become my slaves," I said coldly. "If you refuse, you die." The big leader straightened up, eyes burning with stubborn pride. "That's impossible. I will never become your slave." The next morning, the captured bandits were chained up in a wooden cage. Their leader still had that stubborn look, smirking at me with blood on his lips. He mocked me, asking if I thought killing people would earn me respect. I drew my long sword slowly. The sound of metal made everyone in the cage flinch. I stepped closer, each footstep crunching on dry branches like a countdown. I lifted his chin with the tip of my blade and told him I didn't want fear, I wanted loyalty. And his head would serve as a lesson for the rest. Before he could respond, Doleg shot forward like a blur and drove his short sword straight into the man's heart. Blood sprayed everywhere, spattering my leather armor. The other bandits screamed. Skinny Monkey collapsed, crying and begging for his life. One after another, they all shouted that they were willing to submit. Their voices drowned out the dying man's last twitches. Watching them tremble, I remembered a line from a history book in my old world. "Kill one, and you're a criminal. Kill 10,000, and you're a conqueror." In this world of survival, mercy was a fatal weakness. I pushed down the discomfort I felt inside and ordered them locked in the shed. I gave Doleg 2 gold coins and sent him to town to hire a magic apprentice who could draw slave contract arrays. He knelt, took the coins, and promised to return before dark. Then he vanished down the road like a black whirlwind. I called GIs and had her gather the remaining slaves in the clearing, 10 in total, standing in a crooked line, looking at me with a mix of respect and uncertainty. I asked if any of them knew how to cut trees. Silence. Nobody had that skill. Then a quiet voice came from the back. A thin young man with rough, swollen hands said he had trained as a stonemason before being enslaved. His name was Charles. I immediately promoted him to construction supervisor for the entire territory. His eyes went wide with shock and joy. The other slaves looked at him with envy. I knew this move would motivate everyone. Giving responsibility and recognition was the best way to earn loyalty. After a simple lunch, I led everyone 3 li to the forest. The trees were enormous. Some needed 3 people to wrap their arms around the trunk. I pointed to a clearing and told them to work in pairs, cutting trees about 20 centimeters thick. I unrolled a diagram I'd drawn on animal hide and explained my plan. Wooden fences tall enough and thick enough for defense, buried half a meter deep so enemies couldn't knock them down easily. I also noticed the soil was incredibly rich. Once we cleared the trees, this land could become farmland. The chopping began. By sunset, over 300 logs were stacked neatly in the clearing. On the walk back, something strange happened inside my body. The black bean rice I'd eaten turned into a hot energy flowing through me. It rushed through my body until it hit some kind of invisible wall. The pressure was painful, veins bulged on my forehead, but then the energy faded away. I didn't understand what had just happened, but it excited me. Was this how power awakened in this world? After dark, Doleg returned with the magic apprentice. The man looked shabby, a faded gray robe, a dim crystal staff, clearly a low-level mage down on his luck. But when he started drawing the contract arrays, blue light poured from his fingertips and glowing symbols took shape in the air. One by one, the bandits' resistance faded and they accepted the slave contracts. That night, the bonfires in one village ridge burned brighter than ever. I looked at my new slaves and the mountain of timber and felt a fire burning inside me. I was rewriting my fate. From fighting off bandits to building defenses, from winning hearts to discovering a mysterious power growing within me. Every step was a challenge, but every step brought me closer to my goal. In this dangerous world, I wasn't just building a territory. I was building a legend. Doleig returned with the magic apprentice, a young man named Monty, wearing a faded gray robe with a dim crystal staff at his waist. He tried to look proud, but I could see him gripping his staff nervously when he looked around at our broken-down village. I welcomed him and asked about his skill with slave contract arrays. He bowed politely, but couldn't hide his contempt for our poor territory. Still, he promised to finish the work in half an hour. I tossed him 2 silver coins and told Doleig to assist him and make sure nothing went wrong. After they left to handle the contracts, I heard a beast roar from the forest. I knew there could be dangers lurking near where my slaves were cutting wood. I couldn't afford to lose anyone, so I decided to scout the deeper forest myself. I told Charles to keep the logging going and make sure all the wood was cut to the same size. Then I headed into the forest alone. The deeper I went, the darker it got. Giant trees blocked out the sky. The ground was covered in rotting leaves that smelled damp and sharp. Strange bird calls echoed around me. I pushed through vines that scratched my hands, staying alert for any sign of danger. At first, everything seemed calm, just birds and squirrels. I started to relax, thinking the forest wasn't so dangerous after all. But just as I turned to head back, a deep growl exploded from the bushes to my right. A huge red dog burst out like a fireball, massive, with fur like flames, dripping fangs, and amber eyes full of bloodlust. It went straight for my throat. I dodged sideways, but its claws raked across my chest, tearing 3 deep wounds down to the bone. The pain was blinding. Blood filled my mouth. I cursed and drew my long sword from the spatial ring. The dog landed, spun around, and came at me again even faster. I roared and swung at its head with everything I had. But this beast was experienced. It twisted aside at the last second and slid to my left. I didn't stop. I flipped my wrist and swept the blade sideways. The dog lunged again. We fought back and forth through the trees. Then I had an idea. As the dog charged at my face, I pulled a large code out of my spatial ring and let it fall right over the dog's head, blinding it. In that instant, I sidestepped and brought my sword down hard on its left ribs. The blade cut through bone. Blood sprayed everywhere. The dog let out a horrible scream, collapsed, twitched a few times, and went still. I dropped to the ground, gasping for air, hands covered in blood. My chest was on fire. If this body hadn't been so much stronger than a normal person's, and if the original Richard's combat instincts hadn't kicked in, I would have died right there. After resting, I forced myself up, lifted the huge dog onto my shoulders, and carried it back to the logging site. Blood ran down my back the whole way. When the slaves saw me walk out of the forest carrying that beast, they all stopped and stared. This dog wasn't classified as a magical creature, but it was far more dangerous than any normal animal, not something a warrior apprentice should be able to kill alone. They looked at my pale face and bloody wounds with awe. I dropped the carcass on the ground and called out to Charles, "That's enough for today. Let's go home and eat dog meat tonight." Charles nearly burst with excitement. He turned to the others and announced that every person would get a bowl of dog meat as a reward. The slaves froze for a moment, then dropped to their knees, cheering, "Long live the Lord." Their voices rang with gratitude and loyalty. I told everyone to get up and head home. As we walked back to the village, I felt something I had never felt before, real pride. Being respected like this felt even better than I had imagined. At the village entrance, Gi spotted us from a distance. When she saw the huge dog on a slave's shoulders, her eyes went wide. Then she broke into a grin and ran to the kitchen to start preparing dinner. I looked at my busy slaves, at the village slowly coming back to life, and felt hope. This was only the beginning. I was sure that under my leadership, one village ridge would become the strongest fortress in this wasteland. I told Charles to handle the dog and went to rest. The moment I was out of sight, I stumbled against the wall. The pain hit me all at once. I pulled open my blood-soaked shirt and saw 3 claw marks running from my collarbone to my ribs, the torn flesh turning a sickly purple, some kind of poison from the beast. I took a long drink of strong liquor to fight the chills running through my body. Back in the village, GI's had been busy. She had carried stones from the stream and built a small table from scrap wood. This 16-year-old girl was thin and malnourished, but she worked hard. I noticed she kept swallowing as she watched the meat cooking in the pot. In her whole life as a slave, she had never eaten black bean rice, let alone meat. She never imagined a lord would treat slaves this way. When the sun turned the sky blood red, Charles brought the stewed dog meat to the table. I walked over in my blood-stained cloak. I looked at the simple stone table and at Guy's flushed face and told her she did a good job. She hid her smile behind her hair. The first bite of hot meat woke up every sense in my body. I had only been in this world for 7 days, but this was the first time it felt warm, not the cold fear of survival, but the comfort of sharing a meal with people who depended on me. The slaves lined up for their portions. Some were shaking, tears in their eyes. In this border territory ravaged by orcs, hot soup with meat was something even noble servants rarely got. Monty the magic apprentice sat apart from the others, eating with a silver spoon, studying me with curious eyes. He seemed surprised that the supposedly useless heir of a dead baron was feeding 37 slaves in a place like this. Then something happened inside me. A powerful heat surged through my belly and raced through my body like liquid fire. When it reached my left forearm, I gripped my bowl so hard my knuckles turned white. That invisible barrier I had felt before appeared again, like 1,000 needles stabbing into my flesh, hot and cold forces crashing together inside me. I remembered there was a knight training manual hidden in my father's study. This had to be connected to it. I forced down the rest of the meat. A second wave of heat hit even harder. I grunted. Veins bulged on my forehead. The bowl shattered in my hand, cutting my skin, but I didn't care. Then I heard a snap deep inside my body. The barrier broke. The blocked energy rushed through me like a spring flood. I could feel my muscles tearing and rebuilding, my bones cracking and strengthening. Every breath I took carried a trembling power. My lord, you broke through. Monty dropped his spoon in shock. Every slave looked up, frozen. I stood slowly. My cloak fell away, showing a lean body now packed with explosive strength. I picked up a heavy stone weight from the ground, something that normally took 2 strong men to lift. It felt like nothing. I tossed it 10 paces and smashed a tree stump into splinters. I had a moment of understanding while fighting the beast in the forest, I said, keeping my voice calm even though I was thrilled inside. It's just the first step on the warrior's path. Monty jumped to his feet, his blue robe flapping in the wind. Just the first step? Your father didn't reach level 1 warrior until he was 40, and you. He caught himself and bowed quickly. Forgive me, my lord. Your talent will shock the entire kingdom. I looked at the last light fading in the western sky and thought about the original Richard's memories, the castle burned by orcs, his father's dying hand pressing a warrior badge into his palm. I dug my nails into my fist until I tasted blood. A level 1 warrior is still an ant under the orc cavalry, I said, turning with sharp eyes. But one day, I will make them pay in blood. Monty pulled out a yellowed scroll and reported that all the slave contracts were ready. I just needed to drip blood to seal them. I tossed him 2 gold coins, then added a third as a bonus. He stammered with gratitude. I figured a struggling magic apprentice could use the money for materials. Later that night, I stood alone on the watchtower. The new power flowed through me. I could hear mice moving 100 meters away. I could smell the stream 3 li out. I touched my father's warrior badge, cold metal against my skin. Below me, my slaves sat around the fire, laughing for the first time in who knows how long. Wait for me. Orcs, I whispered, cracking my knuckles. And you nobles eyeing my land. The age of Richard has just begun. The wind caught my cloak and made it snap like a war banner under the moonlight. Morning fog covered the village as I stood outside the shed where the captured bandits were chained. The power from last night's breakthrough was still buzzing through me. I touched the scab on my chest. The beast's claw marks reminded me how dangerous this land was. I opened the shed door. The stink hit me immediately. 13 bandits huddled in the corner, chains scraping the floor. Skinny Monkey looked up with fear in his eyes. I drew my sword and asked if they knew why I had kept them alive. Silence. Because I need workers, I said, pressing the blade against Skinny Monkey's throat. And from now on, you are my slaves. I bit my finger and dripped blood onto each of their foreheads. Blue light glowed as the contract symbols sank into their skin. One by one, all 13 submitted. When the last one knelt, I felt a slight dizziness, a small needle-like pain at my temple. My mental energy had reached its limit. I sheathed my sword and told them they were no longer bandits, but laborers of One Village Ridge. I promised them food at every meal if they worked hard. But I also warned them, if anyone betrayed me, I would show them that death could be a mercy. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. I took Charles to the river at the edge of the village. I unrolled my rough map drawn on animal hide and shared my plan. I wanted to build a defensive line stretching from the eastern hills to the western cliffs, sealing off the entire valley. Charles stared at me, gripping his axe. He said the project was enormous. With our current manpower, it would take at least 2 years. Just cutting enough wood would take months. I smiled and crouched down, drawing in the sand with a stick. I explained my idea. We'd only cut trees 30 centimeters thick or more and use them as posts. For the crossbeams, we'd carve half into protruding tabs and half into matching slots, like building blocks that fit together. This would save time and still be strong. Charles's jaw dropped. As an experienced stonemason, he'd never seen wall building done this way. He asked about the arrow towers. How would we handle the foundation for 10-meter-tall structures? I told him we'd dig 3 meters deep along the riverbank, pack it with crushed stone and clay, then pour in mud mixed with beast blood. Once hardened, this material would be stronger than stone. Each tower would hold 20 archers, with towers spaced 50 meters apart to create overlapping fields of fire. The wind caught my cloak as I turned to face Charles. I told him that if we finished this project, One Village Ridge would become an unbreakable fortress. Then I pulled out a copper whistle engraved with my family crest and made him a promise. When the defensive line was complete, I would personally release him from his slave contract. Charles fell to his knees, forehead hitting the sand. His voice broke as he told me that before meeting me, he was nothing but livestock to be bought and sold. Iron chains had worn off 3 of his fingers, but I had given him dignity and hope. He swore he would protect this land, even if it cost him his life. I helped him up, feeling the old scars on his arms under my hand. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just rebuilding a territory, I was changing people's lives. I told him to stand. From today, he wasn't Slave Charles anymore. He was the engineering supervisor of One Village Ridge. I sent him to gather everyone so we could begin. By the time the sun fully rose, the whole village was alive with activity. Slaves carried axes toward the forest. The former bandits pushed wheelbarrows loaded with stones. GIs led some young workers to sift clay by the river. I stood on high ground watching them all work, and pride swelled in my chest. This broken-down territory would rise under my hands and become a fortress that would make every enemy tremble. From the forest came the rhythmic shouts of men cutting trees, scattering a flock of crows into the sky. Finally starting to look like something, I said to myself, though a worry crept in. But is this fast enough? As evening fell over One Village Ridge, I stood looking out at the land, planning my next moves. Charles came to ask if I had more orders. I told him to send Skinny Monkey to me, then go back to logging. Skinny Monkey came running over with his usual sly grin. I gave him a task: go to Shuangha Town and the surrounding areas and spread the word that One Village Ridge was hiring workers, anyone between 18 and 50 years old. I also told him to buy any slaves he found at a fair price, as many as possible. I promised him promotion and freedom if he did well, but warned him that if he failed, I could crush his soul through the slave contract. He swore he'd bring back plenty of workers and slaves. I handed him 300 gold coins and sent him on his way. Right after Skinny Monkey left, Doleg returned from escorting Monty back to town. I praised his work over the past few days and promoted him to captain of the One Village Ridge Guard force. I gave him permission to build a team of up to 100 guards and handed him 100 gold coins. He knelt and swore to protect the territory with his life. I explained that the guard force should be built mainly from slaves we could trust. Besides defense, I wanted him to send scouts to nearby towns to gather useful intelligence. Then Doleg shared some alarming news. He had heard from a traveling merchant that the war between our Dairy Empire and the Northern Orc Empire had reached a critical point. The orcs had broken through the border, and their advance forces had reached the area near the imperial capital. The royal guard was barely holding them at the gates. Everywhere the orcs passed, they looted and killed, leaving bodies everywhere. Massive waves of refugees were fleeing to remote towns and empty mountains. The empire could barely defend itself and had no power left to protect or control the northern territories. This news hit me hard. The empire was falling apart, and the north had been abandoned. But I also saw the opportunity. With no imperial control, I could rise fast, if I played it right. I told Doleg to start building the guard force immediately. My most urgent priority was getting the defensive wall built. Everything depended on whether Skinny Monkey could bring enough refugees to one village ridge to do the work. Given how desperate these people were, I figured it wouldn't be hard. Anyone starving would gladly work for food. I was about to head to the logging site when I noticed about 20 strangers approaching from the distance. They were stumbling, clearly exhausted. Doleg rushed back and stood behind me with his hand on his sword. The group crossed the river and stopped in front of me. They were ragged, filthy, and starving. Their leader asked if this was one village ridge. When they heard it was, joy lit up their faces. They said they'd heard we were hiring and came to apply. I was thrilled. Skinny Monkey had only been gone a short while and was already producing results. But the fact that refugees had reached us this quickly also meant their numbers were growing fast nearby, both an opportunity and a danger. I smiled and told them we were indeed hiring for wall construction. They all shouted at once that they could do anything as long as they got food. I ordered Doleg to call GIs for registration and to pull Charles and all the slaves back from logging. From now on, every slave would join the guard force instead. The refugees would take over the manual labor. A tall refugee stepped forward nervously and asked if they could eat first. They hadn't had food in 3 days. I didn't hesitate. I sent someone to bring black bread and water. The refugees fell to their knees in gratitude, then surrounded the food and devoured it like starving animals. That night, after the refugees were settled in simple shelters, I stood in the center of camp thinking about what lay ahead. More people meant more mouths to feed, more problems with security and supplies. I had to prepare for all of it, but I was confident. In chaotic times, heroes are born, and I intended to be one of them. One village ridge was like a lonely island in a storm, and I was going to turn it into an unbreakable fortress. Early in the morning, I stood by the wooden fence watching the dirt road. Another group of about 20 refugees arrived, asking if we were hiring. I told them food would come at noon, but only after they worked at the logging site first. They agreed without hesitation and headed off. Watching them go, I felt satisfied. The first batch came yesterday, and now more were already following. I decided it was time to focus on getting stronger. Since my breakthrough, eating black bean rice no longer gave me that warm energy feeling. I needed higher quality food, meat from powerful creatures, like that big dog I killed before. I didn't know anything about meditation or other training methods, and the original Richard had no such memories either. Hunting was my only option. I walked past the logging site where nearly 100 workers were already chopping trees under Charles's direction. Watching them work hard while I just gave orders felt pretty good, I had to admit. I slipped into the forest to hunt, searching carefully for any sign of prey. But after walking around for hours, I found nothing except a few skinny rabbits. Not worth my time. I headed back empty-handed for lunch. Meanwhile, Skinny Monkey was doing incredible work. He went to the refugee camps outside Shuangha Town's gates and played his part perfectly. He sat among the refugees, pretended to be one of them, and started complaining loudly about how the country had abandoned them and the town wouldn't let them in. The refugees erupted in agreement, shouting and cursing. Once he had their emotions boiling, Skinny Monkey stood up and announced that he'd heard about a lord named Richard at one village ridge who was hiring workers for a big construction project. He said there was food, and if people worked well, they might even get houses and land. People doubted him at first, but he said something clever: "We're all going to die anyway. If there's even a small chance this is real, why not try?" Then he pretended to walk away alone. A woman holding a baby stood up first, saying she couldn't let her child starve. Then more followed, and more after that. Skinny Monkey repeated this trick at all 4 gates of the town. By evening, He estimated he'd sent 800 to 1,000 refugees toward one village ridge, without spending a single gold coin. He was thrilled with himself. At a tavern that night, Skinny Monkey overheard something useful. Two men were talking about how refugees near Longxing City to the south had started rioting and robbing merchants. The city guards had killed hundreds to put them down. Skinny Monkey's eyes lit up. Another city full of desperate refugees meant another target for recruitment. When I got back to camp at noon, Doleg was waiting with his report. He had organized a guard force of 20 men split into 2 squads, plus a patrol team of 10 men in 2 rotating groups of 5. I approved the setup but added some orders. Post 2 guards at the bridge crossing at all times to alert us when anyone approached, train the guards hard so they could follow commands without question, and make sure every member was loyal to me above all else. Then I told everyone to eat. GIs had the food ready. The smell of a simple meal filled the air, and for people who had been running for their lives, it was the greatest comfort in the world. I knew this was just the beginning. The challenges ahead would only grow bigger, but so would the opportunities. One Village Ridge's story was just getting started. After lunch, I gathered the newly formed guard force in the village clearing. I looked at these former slaves and spoke plainly. One Village Ridge was not just my territory, it was their home too. I reminded them I had treated them fairly and asked them to fight for everything we had here. I promised that if I grew powerful, they could rise with me. Doleg was the first to shout his loyalty, and the rest followed, their voices echoing across the open ground. I formally appointed Doleg as captain of the entire guard force, both squads and the patrol teams. I named Charles as head of all construction, and I promoted GIs to logistics chief, in charge of supplies, registration, and the kitchen. Each of them knelt and swore to do their best. I ordered Doleg to send people to guard the bridge at the village entrance. More refugees would be arriving today, and I wanted every one of them properly registered. With everything delegated, I suddenly felt free. I remembered the book still sitting in my spatial ring. I'd never had time to look at it. But before I could, a slave came running up, breathless. He told me a group of mercenaries had shown up at the village border and were demanding to pass through our territory to reach the 10,000 beast forest. I was confused. The best route to that forest was through Beast Ridge, northwest of Longxing City, not through our land. I followed the slave to the river crossing. When I arrived, Doleg and about 30 of our men were in a heated standoff with a dozen mercenaries. A big mercenary with a huge blade was mocking our territory and our guards, calling them skinny and weak. Doleg fired back without flinching, matching every insult with a sharper one. The big man lost his temper and swung his blade at Doleg's head. But Doleg was faster. He stepped back just enough to dodge, then thrust his short sword at the man's chest like a striking snake. The mercenary barely rolled away in time. Doleg pressed the attack, stabbing again at the man's neck before he could regain his footing. Their weapons clashed with a shower of sparks, and the big man's hands went numb from the impact. He was shocked. He hadn't expected this lean beast man to be so strong. Doleg struck again from above. The mercenary couldn't block in time and cried out for mercy. Doleg stopped his blade just 1 centimeter from the man's forehead. The mercenary collapsed to the ground, drenched in cold sweat. Doleg turned to the other mercenaries and asked if anyone else wanted to try. Nobody moved. They all knew they were weaker than their leader, who had just lost. The big man stood up and admitted defeat. He explained they meant no harm. They just needed to pass through to the 10,000 beast forest. I stepped forward and asked why they wanted to use my territory instead of the normal route. He told me that Beast Ridge had been taken over by the orcs and was now blocked. They had heard there was a small path through one village ridge that could get them to the forest. I stood there thinking. Letting mercenaries pass through could bring benefits, but it also carried risks. This decision, whether to let them through or not, could change things for one village ridge. And I had a feeling this was just the beginning of much bigger changes to come. I told the mercenaries they could pass through my territory for 50 copper coins per person. It wasn't a random price. It was low enough that they could afford it, but high enough to show that this was my land and passage wasn't free. In a world where 1 copper coin could buy half a loaf of black bread, every coin mattered. Their leader, a tough-looking man named Ryan, turned red with anger. His men gripped their sword hilts. But after glancing at Doleg's blade and our guards standing ready, he swallowed his pride and paid up. He pulled 50 copper coins from his pouch, each one still warm from his body. I could see the bitterness in his eyes. They had already borrowed 20 silver coins from merchants in town for this hunting trip. If they came back empty-handed, their whole team would fall apart. I pocketed the coins and offered to personally guide them to the passage. This was partly to show authority and partly because I wanted to see the route for myself. We walked along a muddy path toward the back mountains. When we reached the canyon entrance, I was stunned. The opening was 100 meters wide, with moss-covered cliffs on both sides glowing an eerie green in the fading light. Wind howled through the depths like ghosts wailing. I pointed into the canyon and told them to follow it for about 50 li to reach the edge of the 10,000 beast forest. I was going off the original Richard's memories. I'd never actually walked this path myself. Ryan stared into the darkness and said he hoped they'd make it back alive. Everyone who entered that forest knew they might not return. Last winter, his team had watched a whole mercenary group get torn apart by mutant wolves. Nothing left, not even bones. But the forest also held opportunity. A single magic crystal from a slain beast could bring huge money. I wished them well and meant it. Watching them disappear into the canyon, I realized these men who lived on the edge of death carried their own pain and helplessness. By the time I got back to the village, it was fully dark. I heard noise and saw the sky glowing orange from torches. At the river crossing, over 1,000 refugees were lined up, waiting patiently at a makeshift registration point. GIs was working through them with a bark paper notebook, sweat on her forehead, carefully recording each person's information. I was impressed by how well she handled it, but worry quickly followed. This many mouths would eat through our food supply fast. The grain from Shuanghe town would last maybe half a month. I'd have to go negotiate another deal tomorrow. Charles returned from the logging site with the first batch of workers. Their ragged clothes couldn't hide the hope in their eyes. I pulled Charles aside and gave him new orders. There was a canyon about 10 li behind the mountains, the only path to the beast forest. I wanted 2 watchtowers and a gate built at its entrance, while continuing the village wall construction at the same time. With over 1,000 people now available, this was our chance to move fast. Charles looked nervous. He said he was just a stonemason and had never managed so many people. I put my hand on his shoulder and told him not to underestimate himself. Every great castle starts with the first stone. If he needed help, he could pick reliable people from the refugees, but he had to choose carefully. He nodded with tears in his eyes and promised to give everything he had. Exhausted, I dragged myself back to my room. In the dim lamplight, I finally remembered the book in my spatial ring. I pulled it out with a thought. The cover read, "Complete Collection of Minor Spells," in gold letters. I opened the first page. The author had written, "Whoever finds this book shares a fate with me." I created it from a lifetime of experience. I don't want to take everything I learned to my grave. My fingers trembled. When I turned to the second page, 2 words jumped out at me: meditation. It was like a key opening a door to a whole new world. Outside, the village lights went dark one by one. Only my room still glowed late into the night. That night, I sat on my straw bed and studied the book from my spatial ring. Complete Collection of Minor Spells. I read the chapter on meditation over and over, memorizing every detail. Then I closed my eyes, crossed my legs, and tried it. At first I felt nothing but my own heartbeat. But on my 7th deep breath, a faint trembling touched my skin, like a gentle breeze across still water. I was thrilled but forced myself to stay calm and keep breathing steadily. Slowly, I felt tiny threads of energy gathering from all directions, warm and alive, flowing toward me. I guided the energy toward a spot in my lower belly, what the book called the chi. But every time the energy gathered there, it dissolved like morning dew in sunlight. I couldn't hold it. I went back to the book and read more carefully. The first stage of meditation was simply feeling the energy. Once you could guide it into your chi, you became a magic apprentice. At that level, you couldn't fight with magic yet, but your mental power would grow stronger. With enough practice, the energy in your chi would eventually condense into a magic core, and that meant reaching level 1 mage. So I had crossed the apprentice threshold, but I wasn't strong enough to form the core yet. I refused to give up. Hour after hour through the night, I repeated the process, pulling energy in, guiding it, concentrating harder each time. When the first sunlight came through my window, it finally happened. The energy condensed into a tiny core in my belly, about the size of a fingernail. I exhaled deeply and felt completely reborn. All the exhaustion from staying up all night vanished. My body felt lighter, stronger, my energy channels wider. I realized that practicing magic didn't just give me spells, it also strengthened my physical body. I noticed something else too. The warrior energy in my body flowed through my channels, while the magic energy gathered in my belly. When the magic energy passed through the area where my warrior energy was stored, the two didn't clash. They seemed to complement each other. I might actually be able to develop both warrior and magic powers at the same time. This excited me more than anything. I stepped outside at dawn feeling refreshed. The territory was bustling with people. GIs ran over to report. 1,580 new refugees had arrived yesterday, 905 men and 675 women, mostly young, with only a handful of elderly. I told her she was doing great work and should pick some helpers from the refugees if she needed them. Then I gave her more orders. I wanted her to find skilled craftsmen among the refugees, blacksmiths, carpenters, bricklayers. The territory would fund small workshops for them, with ownership split 50-50 between the territory and the craftsmen, profits shared equally. I also told her to count how many skilled workers we had in total. I called Charles, and we walked together toward Shuanga town. On the way, he reported that logging was going well with all the new workers, though tools were still short. I told him about a faster way to transport logs. Throw them into the river upstream, near the logging site, and let the current carry them downstream to our bridge, where people could hook them out with poles and ropes. It would save huge amounts of labor. Charles's face lit up. He couldn't believe he hadn't thought of it himself. His admiration for me grew a little more, and honestly, so did my confidence. I looked at Charles, who was still buzzing with excitement about the log floating idea, and told him to focus. We had a trip to Shuanga town to make. He pulled himself together, and we set off. Meanwhile, Skinny Monkey was on his own mission. He drove a horse cart through the night, racing toward Longxing City to recruit more refugees. What he found there was far worse than anything we expected. When he arrived at dawn, the city gates were sealed shut. Guards lined the walls with bows drawn. Below, at least 8,000 refugees, maybe 10,000, surrounded the gates so tightly there wasn't a gap anywhere. The air was thick with tension. Skinny Monkey changed into ragged clothes, rubbed dirt on his face, and slipped into the crowd. He found a hunched man near the back and asked what was happening. The man told him that days ago, the city lord had ordered guards to clear refugees from the roads. When people resisted, the guards killed nearly 500 of them. Since then, the survivors had gathered together and surrounded the city, demanding justice. They'd been there 3 days with no food, sleeping on the ground, huddled together for warmth. The man said he'd heard an attack on the city was planned for today. He hadn't eaten in a day and a half. Everyone was so desperate that starvation would kill them before the guards did. Skinny Monkey stared at the massive walls and thick gates in disbelief. Who could convince starving people to charge a fortified city with bare hands? It was suicide. Then 3 deep horn blasts shook the air. The man's eyes went wild with excitement. It was the signal to attack. Thousands of refugees surged forward like a tidal wave toward the walls. The sight of 10,000 people charging was overwhelming. But before the archers on the walls could fire, something incredible happened. 2 enormous fireballs rose from within the refugee crowd, blazing so bright they seemed to outshine the rising sun. The fireballs hung in the air for a moment, then shot toward the city gate like burning meteors. 2 explosions shattered the gates into splinters. The blast knocked Skinny Monkey off his feet. He realized then that this wasn't a mindless mob. Someone powerful was behind it. There were actual mages hidden among the refugees. He had never seen real magic before, and its destructive power terrified him. The starving refugees screamed and charged through the smoke toward the broken gates. But when they got within 20 meters, the archers finally fired. Arrows rained down, and the people in front fell by the dozens. Blood soaked the ground. Their bodies were as fragile as paper against steel-tipped arrows. Still, hunger drove them forward. People in the crowd kept shouting, "There's food inside the city." That single promise made them forget their fear of death. The arrows couldn't come fast enough to stop them all, and some broke through to the gate. But waiting inside was a squad of soldiers in black iron armor, wielding long swords with cold, empty eyes. These were elite bronze-rank warriors. They cut down the refugees like a butcher slaughtering lambs. One swing, one death. Hundreds fell in minutes. The gap in strength was absolute. Fear finally spread through the crowd. The front rows tried to retreat, while the back rows still pushed forward, creating chaos. The Black Iron Knights simply stood at the gate, waiting like patient hunters. Then the mages in the crowd acted again. Two more massive fireballs formed in the air, spinning and growing, absorbing energy until they reached their peak. They flew at the gate like blazing comets. The knights raised their shields in formation, but the fireballs smashed through everything: shields, armor, men, sending them flying like broken toys. Every knight at the gate was down. With the obstacle destroyed, the refugees' courage returned. They let out a roar and flooded through the open gate, a wave of starving, desperate people pouring into Longxing City. The city that once seemed unbreakable was about to face a disaster like nothing it had ever seen. I wasn't there to see what happened next at Longxing City, but Skinny Monkey later told me everything, and what he described was beyond anything I could have imagined. After the gates were blown open, the refugees poured into the city like a flood. What followed was pure madness. Starving people smashed open shops and fought each other over scraps of moldy flour and half-eaten sausages. An old woman clung to a bag of grain until 3 men dragged her away, her nails leaving bloody scratches on the stone. Boys bit into each other's arms, fighting over a piece of meat. Hunger had stripped away every last bit of humanity. But the mages who had destroyed the gates moved through the chaos like rocks in a river. 2 of them wore robes embroidered with silver thread, with purple crystals that glowed coldly. 12 knights in black armor surrounded them, shields engraved with flame symbols, lances pointed skyward. Anyone who got too close was pushed back with a spear tip. These men weren't here to loot. They had a specific target. Skinny Monkey followed them through 3 streets littered with bodies until they reached the city lord's mansion in the center of town. On the white stone steps stood Lord Laid in gleaming silver armor trimmed with mithril, a ruined sword at his waist glowing with blue light. Behind him, 12 black iron knights formed a half-moon shield wall crackling with magical energy. Laid roared at the mages to stop, demanding to know who dared attack his city. The older mage, scarred across one eye, pulled back his hood and waved his staff. 10 fireballs appeared floating in the air. He declared that the Mage Guild had heard about the slaughter of 800 refugees, and they had come for justice. Laid laughed and called them liars, accusing them of using the refugees as pawns to start a war. Then he drew his sword, and crimson battle energy exploded from his body like burning flames. The stone beneath his feet cracked and turned to dust. His own knights knelt in reverence. This was the highest respect for a supreme warrior. The man was a 6th-rank fighter, far more powerful than anyone expected. The older mage's eyes went wide. The younger mage threw up 10 ice walls to block Laid's charge, but the city lord moved like a ghost. His sword shattered each wall into crystals. He cut through the frontline knights like they were children, splitting one in half with a wave of energy, punching another through a shop wall. Blood sprayed across the mage's robes. The gray-robed mage screamed for his partner to start casting. His staff blazed red as the floating fireballs merged into one massive fireball 3 meters wide. But Laid saw it coming. He tripled his battle energy and formed a dome-shaped crimson shield around himself. The fireball hit the shield, and the entire city shook. Skinny Monkey was thrown to the ground, choking on sulfur and blood. When the dust cleared, Laid's armor was cracked like a spider web and blood dripped from his mouth, but he was still standing. The old mage, on the other hand, was white as paper, his staff cracked in several places. That single attack had drained most of his magic. Laid wiped the blood from his lip and raised his sword again, mocking the Mage Guild's power. But the young mage suddenly raised both hands. Dark clouds boiled overhead, lightning snaking through them. At the same time, the old mage drove his staff into the ground, and the entire plaza in front of the mansion turned into a pool of bubbling lava, flames licking at Laid's shield. Skinny Monkey crouched behind a stone pillar, barely breathing, and realized this was no ordinary siege. This was a battle between powers that could reshape the continent. Refugees' lives, mages' schemes, and a warrior's pride all tangled together in the ruins of Longxing City. And he was nothing but a tiny thread in this enormous web, one that could snap at any moment. This is what Skinny Monkey told me he saw next at Longsheng City. After the massive fireball hit his shield, Lord Lade dropped to one knee on the broken stone. His silver armor was cracked everywhere, blood seeping through. His battle energy was completely drained. But the two mages weren't much better, pale as ghosts, hands shaking, barely standing, held up by their knights. Lade's remaining guards rushed in to surround and protect him. Then his daughter Yudi broke through the crowd, face full of worry and rage. She wanted to charge the mages herself, but Lade grabbed her wrist and stopped her. He said she wasn't strong enough, and the mages had also spent most of their power. Lade called his guard captain, Feld, and ordered him to attack. Feld hesitated. They only had about 20 men left while the enemy still had over 30 knights. Yudi screamed at Feld for being a coward, but Lade silenced her. He asked Feld for his honest opinion. Feld suggested trying to negotiate first, but the mages had no interest in talking. Their leader slammed his staff down and ordered his knights to attack, leaving no survivors. Lade laughed bitterly and told Feld there was no choice. They had to fight to the death. Feld turned to his men and gave a speech about protecting their homes, their families, their children's future. The guards roared back with a battle cry that shook the sky. The two sides crashed together. Metal rang against metal, men screamed and fell. The Mage Guild had more numbers, but Lade killed their knight captain early in the fight. Feld, a third-rank golden knight, fought like a lion, leaping, slashing, cutting down enemies left and right. His courage inspired the guards to fight beyond their limits, shocking the mages who had expected an easy victory. The battle raged for about 15 minutes. When the dust settled, only Feld remained standing on Lade's side, covered in blood. The mages had just 2 ordinary knights left, guarding the 2 exhausted mages. Lade called out, asking the mages to surrender. One of them laughed coldly. He said Lade was a fool to think a third-rank knight could threaten 2 third-rank mages. Then he flicked his wrist and fired a blast of white light from a magic attack scroll. It punched straight through Feld's chest before he could even react. Feld fell dead without a sound. Lade's heart shattered watching his loyal captain die. The mage threw Lade's own words back at him. Surrender or die? He ordered his 2 remaining knights to kill Lade. Lade pushed Yudi behind him. His body was broken, every movement agony, but his eyes were iron. He would protect his daughter with his last breath. As the enemy knights closed in, he pulled a red pill from his armor and swallowed it. Instantly, burning energy exploded through his body. His skin turned an eerie red, and his eyes blazed with madness. The mage screamed in terror. It was a berserker pill, and they had to kill him before it took full effect. But it was too late. Lade moved like red lightning. 2 flashes of his sword, and both knights dropped dead before they could blink. Without stopping, he charged the 2 mages. They tried to run, but fear had frozen their legs. 1 swing each, and they fell under his blade. With every enemy dead, Lade's body finally gave out. He collapsed to the ground, eyes slowly closing. But on his lips was a small, peaceful smile. He had protected his home. He had protected his daughter. Skinny Monkey barely escaped Longsheng City alive. After watching the battle between the city lord and the mages, he knew the city was falling apart. He stopped caring about recruiting refugees and just ran for the gates as fast as his legs could carry him. Meanwhile, Charles and I rode to Shuanghe Town that morning to buy supplies. We went straight to the Eternal Trading Company. Mill came rushing out from behind his counter with that fake smile of his, calling me his dear lord and acting surprised to see me. I knew he just saw me as a money tree. I told him I needed a large amount of grain. His smile disappeared instantly, replaced by a pained look. He sighed and said prices had skyrocketed because of the war. Farmland abandoned, refugees everywhere, no one growing crops. Black bean powder was now 40 silver per 100 pounds, double the old price. Grass seed powder was 20 silver per 100 pounds, also doubled. Only slave food stayed about the same at 1 silver for 10 pounds. I knew he was exaggerating to squeeze more money out of me, but he wasn't entirely wrong either. Big trading companies like his always hoarded grain for times like these. I tried to negotiate, reminding him we were old customers. He pretended to struggle with it, then offered slave food at 1 silver for 15 pounds, a tiny concession to push me toward his cheapest, highest stock product. I thought it over. Slave food wasn't nutritious, but it was better than nothing. With my territory's population growing fast and no steady income, I couldn't afford to be picky. I handed him 100 gold coins and told him to spend it all on slave food. On top of that, I ordered 100 two-man saws, 100 shovels, 100 pickaxes, 100 short swords, and 100 bows with arrows. Mill's face lit up like the sun. He calculated the total at 410 gold coins, but rounded down to 400 as a gesture of friendship. I agreed to pay the balance when everything was delivered. He promised tools right away, but said the grain would take 3 days to transport fully. Just as I was about to leave, Mill asked if I wanted to see his new batch of slaves. I was curious, so I followed him to the backyard. In the iron cages, I saw at least 50 or 60 slaves. But what caught my eye were 2 special cages on the left. The first held 4 massive creatures with huge bull horns on their heads and muscular bodies. Minotaurs, one of the beastman races. They looked proud and fierce. The second cage held something even stranger. 3 beings with human upper bodies and thick snake tails instead of legs, covered in shimmering scales. Mill eagerly explained they were Python tribe snake people, born fighters with incredible strength and speed. My heart raced. Having these powerful beastmen would boost my territory's strength enormously. But then reality hit me. I was already struggling to feed a growing population. Adding these big creatures with huge appetites would only make things worse. I shook my head and told Mill I couldn't afford to feed them. He looked devastated. These beastmen were actually war prisoners bought from the front lines, technically illegal to sell, but laws meant nothing in these chaotic times. The real problem for Mill was that they ate enormous amounts, and nobody in this small town could afford to keep them except me. As I turned to leave, Mill chased after me, sweating heavily. He dropped the price to just 1 gold coin each, practically giving them away. He was begging me to take them off his hands. I frowned at Mill's offer of 1 gold coin per beastman. It seemed too cheap. Something had to be wrong with them. Mill dropped his salesman act and actually looked miserable. He admitted business was terrible. Nobody was buying anything in these times. The slaves were eating through his profits every day, and if he didn't sell them soon, they'd consume his entire month's earnings. He said he'd rather sell them cheap to me than let a stranger have them. I couldn't tell how much of it was true, but looking around town, I could see he had a point. The streets were nearly empty. Every shop looked dead, whether he was exaggerating or not. 1 gold coin for a powerful beastman warrior was an incredible deal. Fine, I said. I'll take the beastmen. And I'll take all the other beastmen in those cages too. Mill's face transformed from misery to pure joy in an instant. Then he surprised me even more. He offered to give me all the remaining human slaves for free. I was stunned, but it made sense. With war everywhere and refugees flooding in, ordinary slaves had no value. Nobody wanted to buy mouths they couldn't feed. I walked to the cages and started the contract ritual, biting my finger and dripping blood onto each slave's forehead. The light flashed and spiritual connections formed one after another. 53 contracts in a row hit me hard. Dizziness washed over me, and I had to grab the cage bars to stay upright. My mental energy was nearly drained, but I held it together, and when it was done, all 53 were bound to me. Mill looked at me differently after that. Most people couldn't handle so many contracts at once, and he seemed impressed. I also asked about horses. He said enchanted horses weren't available, but he could get ordinary ones. I wanted 10, but the Empire had taken most horses for the war. He only had 2 right now, at 3 gold coins each. I didn't bother haggling. In wartime, finding any horses was lucky enough. With the deals done, I led everyone to the same food shop as last time. I ordered black bean rice for each person, double portions for the beastmen. That's when Skinny Monkey appeared. He looked exhausted, covered in dust, his hair a mess. He said he'd just raced back from Longsheng City and had urgent news. He leaned close and whispered everything he'd witnessed: the siege, the mages, the battle with the city lord, the chaos. As I listened, my eyes grew wider. If what he said was true, Longsheng City was now a city without a ruler. A bold idea started forming in my mind. I asked Skinny Monkey how much gold he had left. He said 299 coins. He hadn't needed to spend any because the refugees were so desperate they came to one village ridge just hearing there was food. I took his coins, added 150 of my own, and handed the total to Charles. Charles, finish eating, then take one slave and head back to the territory. Skinny Monkey and I are going to Longxing City. Charles bowed and accepted without question. I called out to the waiter for food, and as everyone sat down to eat, I felt the excitement building inside me. A new adventure was about to begin. After lunch, I led Skinny Monkey and my 52 new slaves toward Longxing City. Charles took the gold coins and rode back to one village ridge with one slave. The road was rough and full of holes, and it took us a day and a half to reach the city. What I saw at the gates confirmed everything Skinny Monkey had told me. The massive city doors were gone. Nothing left but broken wood, twisted nails, and shattered beams scattered everywhere. A few people hurried out clutching stolen goods, eyes full of fear. Nobody was guarding anything. The city had completely fallen into chaos. This was exactly the opportunity one needed. I smiled and led my group straight through the gates toward the city lord's mansion. My plan was simple. Take the mansion first, then seize the north and south gates. Once I controlled those 3 points, the city would be mine. It was a huge gamble. If I angered the wrong person, I could disappear from this world without a trace. But in times like these, the bold survive. At the mansion, a crowd of refugees was pushing against the front doors, trying to break in. They had already looted everything else in the city and were after whatever was left inside. I felt no pity. In this world, today's victims become tomorrow's mob. I told Skinny Monkey to clear them out. He shouted at the crowd to leave, warning that we had taken control. But the refugees looked back at our small group, sneered, and kept pushing at the doors. So I gave the real order. Minotaurs, dogheads, snake men, charge. Take the entrance. Kill anyone who stands in your way. My 16 beastmen moved like a black wave. The lead Minotaur shoved refugees aside like they were made of paper. They reached the doors in seconds. When one tall refugee shouted that they had found this place first, a snake man drove a sword through him without hesitation. Blood sprayed, and the man dropped dead. The crowd exploded in panic. Screaming, they scattered in every direction. In this world, violence speaks louder than words. I nodded at the snake man with approval. Then I told the Minotaurs to open the mansion doors. 5 of them backed up, charged together, and smashed the doors wide open with a thunderous crash. I led everyone inside and ordered them to search every corner. Books, treasure, anything useful. Bring it all or mark what couldn't be moved. The slaves scattered like hungry wolves through every room and hallway. Skinny Monkey stayed by my side. I gave him his most important task yet. Go out and recruit at least 100 people for a temporary guard force, as fast as possible. He bowed and left. To my amazement, he returned quickly with over 100 men. I was impressed. I promoted him to captain of this new guard force and told him to keep expanding it to 500. Then I ordered him to split his men into 2 groups and seize both the south and north gates. No one in, no one out. Anyone who tried to force their way through would be killed. Skinny Monkey left with confidence. Meanwhile, the slaves came back one by one carrying their finds: gold, silver, jewelry, ancient-looking vessels. The pile of treasure grew and grew. I couldn't help laughing out loud. Coming to Longxing City was the best decision I'd made since arriving in this world. The last to return were the Minotaurs. They carried armfuls of goods, and a woman. She was tied up with rough rope, mouth gagged with cloth, slung over a Minotaur's shoulder. They reported finding a hidden treasury, and this woman had been inside trying to stop them. They'd overpowered her and brought her to me for judgment. I looked at her closely. She was strikingly beautiful, deep Western features, thick eyebrows, large eyes, golden hair falling like a waterfall, long legs, fair skin, like a living porcelain doll. By any standard, she was extraordinary. I stared at her, and a complicated thought crossed my mind. Inside the mansion, my Minotaurs brought the captured woman before me. I told them to remove the gag from her mouth. The moment the cloth came off, she erupted like a wild animal, screaming that we were dogs of the Mage Guild and swearing revenge in the name of the Dairy Empire. I was taken aback by her fury, but then I remembered what Skinny Monkey had told me about the battle. I put on a calm smile and introduced myself as Lord Richard of One Village Ridge. I told her we had nothing to do with the Mage Guild and asked who she was. She settled down a little. Her name was Yudi. She was the city lord's daughter. After her father died fighting the mages, she had buried him herself, locked the mansion doors, dismissed all the servants, and hidden in the treasury, terrified of the rampaging refugees outside. I told her she was safe now. Then I explained, with my best serious face, that according to imperial law, when a city is invaded and its ruler can no longer protect it, nearby lords have the right and duty to step in and take temporary control. I said I had rushed here the moment I heard the news, to restore order and uphold the empire's rule. Every word sounded noble and righteous. Only I knew the real ambition behind them. Yudi's eyes lit up with hope. She thanked me and begged me to help put down the mobs terrorizing her city. That's when I dropped the truth on her. I'm not helping you, I said. I'm helping myself. Under imperial law, since you can no longer protect this city, I have the right to take control of it. Longxing City is now under my management. You're welcome to live safely in the mansion, but you no longer have any authority here. She exploded. She screamed that her father had spent his whole life building this city and that she would inherit his position. She ordered me to leave immediately. I stayed calm and told her plainly, with or without me, someone else would have taken the city. At least I was a lord of the Dairy Empire, not some outsider. Then I added a key word, temporarily. I said once she had the power to protect Longxing City on her own, I would withdraw and return everything to her. It was a lie, of course. I had no intention of giving up a prize like this. But it worked. Yudi caught that word and clung to it. She straightened her back, looked me in the eye, and said she would take her city back soon. Then she walked out with her head held high. I watched her leave without stopping her. I wasn't going to harm an unarmed woman. And her dream of reclaiming the city? That was never going to happen. But before I could even start planning my next steps, a soldier came running in, panicking. Refugees had surrounded the east gate and were trying to smash through. Skinny Monkey's guards were struggling to hold them back. I left 4 minotaurs to guard the mansion and rushed to the east gate with everyone else. When I arrived, the scene was ugly. Hundreds of refugees were crashing against Skinny Monkey's defensive line like waves. His men were barely holding, and several were already on the ground, bleeding. I climbed to a high point and shouted at the crowd, "Listen, anyone who charges the gate again will be killed on the spot." Some refugees near the back recognized me from the mansion and ran away in fear. But most of them hadn't seen what happened there. They ignored my warning and kept pushing, clutching bags full of stolen goods they wanted to take outside the city. My patience was gone. To take control of this city, I needed to make an example. I raised my voice one final time. "All soldiers, anyone who charges the gate dies. No exceptions." "Yes, sir," my men roared back as one, their voices shaking the ground. My slaves charged toward the gate, and the refugees scrambled out of the way. We reached Skinny Monkey's position without a fight. He looked relieved to see me and apologized for nearly losing control. I told him it wasn't his fault. There were just too many of them, and they weren't really refugees anymore. The stolen goods had turned them into a mob, but the problem remained. Hundreds of them stood there clutching their loot, refusing to leave. One bold man shouted that whatever people grabbed was theirs to keep, and the crowd roared in agreement. They had no intention of giving anything back. I was stuck. I couldn't slaughter hundreds of civilians, but I couldn't let them walk away with everything either. Then I noticed a new group coming up behind the refugees. Locals, the original residents of Longxing City, armed with whatever weapons they could find. They surrounded the refugees from the other side. A man in his 50s stepped forward and demanded the refugees drop everything they had stolen. The refugees clutched their bags tighter, eyes darting nervously. This was my chance. I announced loudly that I was Lord Richard of One Village Ridge and that Longxing City was now under my control. The middle-aged man was overjoyed. He said these refugees had broken into their homes and stolen their belongings, and he begged me to help get everything back. I turned to the refugees and gave them one final warning. Put down the stolen goods, hands on your heads, squat on the ground. Do that, and I would forgive their crimes. Resist, and face the consequences. The crowd wavered. Some were ready to give up. But then someone deep in the crowd shouted, "Don't listen to him. This stuff is ours. Let's rush the gate together." The mob surged forward. Instantly, my Snake Man warrior Sneeko One and several other snake beastmen drew their swords and formed a wall in front of me without being asked. I was pleased. These slaves had real protective instincts, not just obedience from the contract. The sight of towering beastmen with drawn blades slowed the crowd down. Most people had heard of other races, but had never faced one up close. Fear crept into their eyes, but that same loud voice kept pushing them forward. We can't retreat. There's no way back. We have to break through. Before he could finish, an arrow from Sneakowen's crossbow punched through his skull. He dropped dead instantly. I looked at the snake man. What's your name? He seemed to struggle for a moment, then lowered his proud head. Respected master, I am your loyal servant, Sneakowen. Good. Very good, I said. Panic swept through the refugees when they saw their leader fall. I seized the moment and shouted again. This is your last chance. Drop everything. Hands on heads, squat down, and I, as the new lord of Longsheng City, will pardon all your crimes. Anyone still standing will be treated as a criminal and killed. Some dropped immediately. Others hesitated, thinking I was bluffing. All soldiers, anyone not on the ground, is a criminal. Fire. A volley of crossbow bolts flew into the crowd. Several people fell with arrows buried in their bodies. That was enough. The refugees closest to the fallen men dropped to the ground instantly. The ones behind copied them. Within minutes, every single person was squatting with their hands on their heads. I finally let out a breath. If I had handled this badly, governing Longsheng City would have been a nightmare. The middle-aged local man approached me and introduced himself as the old city lord's butler. He thanked me on behalf of all the citizens. I studied him. He seemed sharp, organized, and knew the city well. I asked if he would be willing to work for me and help manage things. I offered fair pay. His face lit up. He had introduced himself as the butler on purpose, hoping to win my favor. He dropped to his knees immediately and swore to serve me faithfully. Luck was on my side. I had just gained someone who actually knew how this city worked. I asked the middle-aged man his name. He said it was Siskoff, and he had served as Lord Lade's butler for years. He cursed the Mage Guild for attacking during a time when the Empire was already fighting foreign enemies, and praised me for arriving when I did. He was smooth with words, flattering me while mourning his old master at the same time. I could tell he was experienced and clever. I made my assignments. Skinny Monkey would keep guarding the gates. I promoted the Snake Man Sneakowen to deputy captain of the guard force and stationed him and his tribesmen at the east gate. I warned them that Mage Guild survivors might try to sneak out during the night to call for reinforcements. Back at the mansion, the 4 Minotaurs were standing guard with their axes. I asked their names. They answered one by one. Ox 1, Ox 2, Ox 3, Ox 4. I couldn't help laughing. Beastmen were so simple. Even their names were just numbers. I appointed Ox 1 as captain of the mansion guard and put all remaining slaves under his command for training. I was exhausted. Days of fighting and traveling had drained me completely. I told everyone to take turns standing guard and asked Siskoff to arrange dinner. He led me to the former city lord's bedroom, a solid stone room, simple but sturdy. Inside, a magic lamp glowed softly, turning on automatically as darkness fell. I barely noticed any of it. The moment I reached the bed, I collapsed and slept deeply. The next morning, Siskoff knocked and brought in 4 servants carrying trays of beautiful food. But what caught my eye was a large beast leg giving off an incredible smell. I asked what it was. Siskoff explained that he'd found it at the market that morning. Skinny Monkey had briefly opened the gates to let in local merchants with vegetables and supplies. A hunter was selling a wind wolf, a magical beast. The hunter hadn't actually killed it himself. He'd found it dead after it fought a magic bear. Still, the meat was real magic beast flesh. I took a bite. It was salty but delicious, and immediately I felt a warm energy forming in my belly. I grabbed the whole leg and started devouring it without stopping. The energy inside me grew wild. It filled my belly, then rushed to my left arm's energy point, circled through, and shot toward my right arm. But my right arm hadn't formed an energy point yet. The power slammed against that spot again and again, building pressure. My blood was boiling, every cell screaming for more power. I kept eating. When I swallowed the last piece of the entire wolf, I felt a sudden pop. The energy broke through and opened the right arm's energy point. A wave of relief and strength washed over my whole body. "My lord, you broke through," Siskoff exclaimed. Having served Lord Lade for years, he recognized a breakthrough instantly. He couldn't believe I had advanced just from eating breakfast. I told him to leave me alone so I could stabilize my new level. He understood and quietly closed the door behind him. Sitting on the bed, I took stock. Just days ago at one village ridge, I had broken through to warrior level 1. Now, after eating the wind wolf, I had reached warrior level 2. It was happening incredibly fast. This trip to Longxing City had boosted my power beyond anything I expected, and it made me even more determined to hold on to this city. But I also knew I was still not truly strong. What I lacked was combat techniques, proper fighting skills. Raw power without skill meant nothing against a trained warrior. I would need to search the mansion thoroughly for any technique manuals the old city lord might have left behind. For now, I focused on stabilizing. I circulated the energy between my left and right arms, round after round, feeling it settle and solidify. By the time I opened my eyes, the sun was already high. Longxing City needed my attention. Defenses to strengthen, the mage guild threat still lurking, enemies outside the walls watching. There was no time to rest. Early the next morning, I stepped outside and gave Siskoff his orders. I told him to call Skinny Monkey back from the east gate and leave Sneeko when in charge there. Then I wanted a public notice posted. The city lord's mansion was recruiting guards, ages 18 to 45, with experienced warriors and mages getting priority and good pay. But first, before anything else, I needed Skinny Monkey and Siskoff to do a full inventory of the mansion's finances. Every coin, every document. I wanted a detailed list by evening. After they left, I went back to my room and pulled out the old magic book. As a level 1 mage, I desperately needed to grow stronger. I opened it to the low-level spells section. The first spell was Illumination, a simple light-making spell with no combat use. But every great tower starts with a foundation. I sat cross-legged on the bed and began channeling the magic energy from my core. I failed the first time. The energy scattered wildly through my channels, and only a wisp of smoke came from my fingertip. Second try, third try, nothing. Sweat dripped onto the book's pages, but I refused to quit. I steadied my breathing, calmed my mind, and kept absorbing the magic elements floating in the air. On my 7th attempt, the energy finally flowed smoothly from my core, through my arm, to my fingertip. A tiny flame appeared, no bigger than a bean, but steady. I practiced for over an hour until I could control its size and brightness at will. But I wanted more. I turned to the next spell, Small Fireball. This was a real combat spell, level 1 fire magic, a simplified version of the level 2 Extreme Fireball. Unlike the light spell, it required pushing magic energy outside my body, shaping fire elements into a solid ball, and controlling its flight path with mental power. It was brutally hard. My palms got burned several times. Small explosions kept going off in the room. Fail, restart, fail again, restart again. Hours passed. The sky outside grew dark. Just when I was about to give up, the fire elements in the air suddenly became active. They gathered in front of me and formed a fist-sized fireball. The heat scorched my skin, but excitement overpowered the pain. Then I realized I had a serious problem. I hadn't thought about where to aim it. In a panic, I flung it at a wooden cabinet in the corner. The fireball hit with a boom, blasting the cabinet into splinters. I stood there stunned, but then I noticed something behind the wreckage. A hidden compartment in the wall. It had 3 layers. I kicked aside the debris and carefully opened the first one. Inside, on silk cloth, lay a belt that looked ordinary. But the moment I picked it up, a strange sensation flooded my mind. It was a spatial belt with 100 square meters of storage space inside, and it was already full. I dripped blood on it to bind it to me. Inside were bags of gold coins, glittering gems, and mysterious items sealed with magic. The old city lord Lade had been incredibly wealthy. With shaking hands, I opened the second layer. A thick book sat inside, its cover stamped with 3 golden characters, Flame Dragon Technique. My heart nearly burst. This was exactly what I needed, a real combat fighting technique. I grabbed it and stored it in the spatial belt. The third layer made me gasp out loud. Over a dozen magic beast crystal cores were arranged neatly inside a magic array, each one pulsing with powerful energy. Their glowing surfaces seemed to hold the secrets of the entire magical world. The magic core in my belly stirred on its own, responding to their call. Sunset light poured through the broken window, turning the room golden. I held the crystals in my hand and felt a surge of ambition. These unexpected treasures might be exactly what I needed to change the fate of Longxing City and my own. My hands trembled holding the magic beast crystals. The energy in my core was boiling. These crystals were the key to breaking through as a mage, but now wasn't the time. The city was still unstable. I stored them all in my new spatial belt. A knock at the door. Skinny Monkey and Siskoff came in with the inventory report. Skinny Monkey read from a yellowed scroll. 35,780 gold coins. Over 100,000 silver coins still being counted. 10 boxes of low-grade beast crystals. 50 boxes of low-grade magic crystal, or 1 box of mid-grade, or 25 magic lamps. 300 regular iron swords. 10 refined swords. 1 enchanted sword. 200 crossbows. Thousands of arrows. 50 shields. 30 war horses, and 1 griffin. There were also 123 prisoners, including 25 pig-headed beastmen and 1 fox tribe member. South of the city was a small magic crystal mine, and to the north was an iron mine with a large blacksmith shop. The granary held about 200,000 pounds of food. The city had 700 plots of farmland and 1,000 agricultural slaves. I could barely contain my excitement. Days ago, I couldn't have dreamed of this kind of wealth. Dinner arrived, more wind wolf meat. I tore into it eagerly. The warm energy wasn't as intense as the first time, but it worked like fine needles, steadily strengthening my channels and bones. By the end of the meal, my warrior level had stabilized firmly in the middle of second rank. The magic crystal mine changed everything. In this world, controlling or meant controlling power. Whether recruiting strong fighters or developing territory, magic crystals were the ultimate currency. My doubts about holding Longxing City vanished. I gave my orders for the next day. Skinny Monkey would handle city security and expand the guard force to 1,000, focusing on quality over quantity. Siskoff would manage all civilian affairs, trade, infrastructure, defense repairs. I told him to send 10 horses and 20,000 pounds of grain to 1 village ridge, hire craftsmen through the mercenary guild to help with construction there, and make sure Doleig finished the mountain pass fortifications before winter. Then I told them both not to disturb me. I was going into seclusion to train. I had Ox 1 post 2 Minotaur guards outside my door. Alone at last, I pulled a fire element magic crystal from the spatial belt. I entered meditation, gripped the crystal, and let its energy pour into me. It was like a dam breaking. Burning magic flooded my channels, scorching everything from fingertips to core. 3 days and 3 nights I sat there. The crystal slowly dimmed, then cracked and crumbled to dust. But the magic surging through me had grown enormously. With a deep internal boom, I shattered the barrier of level 1 and became a level 2 mage. I immediately opened the magic book to the level 2 section and found the mid-rank fireball spell. With my core now transformed, I could hold far more magic power and understood the theory much better. But this spell was still extremely difficult. It required combining internal magic with external fire elements to create a fireball nearly a meter wide. I failed 10 times. But finally, a massive fireball the size of a bull's head formed in my palms. I could feel the air warping from the heat. I carefully guided it toward the courtyard. The moment I released it, an explosion shook the entire mansion. A beautiful stone table was blown to powder, and flying debris gouged deep craters in the ground. My 2 Minotaur guards nearly dropped their axes in shock. In their experience, only legendary great mages could produce that kind of power. I stared at the destruction, half amazed and half embarrassed. Next time, I muttered to myself, I need to find a bigger place to practice. I stood at my door and asked the Minotaur guards how long I'd been inside. 3 days and 3 nights, they said. No wonder my stomach was screaming. I sent them to get food. While waiting, I reflected on what I'd achieved. The massive fireball I created still amazed me. I was now a real mage. But I wanted more. I pulled the combat manual from my spatial belt, Flame Fist, a fire attribute fighting technique. Perfect for a fire mage like me. I opened the first page and read, Flame Fist is the most pure and fierce fist art. Before learning it, you must not have practiced any other combat technique, or the conflicting energies will cause an explosion. I burst out laughing. It was as if this technique had been made specifically for me. I silently thanked the dead city Lord Lade. His treasures were fueling my rise. The manual described the process. Strengthen the body first. Gather internal energy, circulate it through the limbs, compress it into the fists, then release it to strike. The requirements were brutal, extreme physical endurance and iron willpower. Food arrived, 4 dishes, 3 of them meat. I dug in hungrily. As the warm energy from the food flowed through my body and circled through my energy points, something clicked. The energy movement I felt while eating matched exactly what the Flame Fist manual described. They were the same process. Thrilled, I abandoned all table manners and wolfed down plate after plate. Energy kept building, circulating, and purifying inside me. When I finished the third plate, a powerful surge of energy rushed toward my left leg. It gathered at the knee joint but couldn't break through. Some invisible barrier blocked it. I stayed calm. Sitting on the bed, I focused everything on guiding the energy, compressing it, squeezing out impurities. Again and again I pushed. Finally, the barrier shattered. A new energy point formed in my left leg. "I'm a third-rank warrior now," I shouted. The Flame Fist body tempering method and the energy from magic beast meat worked together perfectly. I couldn't wait to test the technique. Following the manual, I channeled energy into my left fist. It grew hot and swollen, and a faint red glow appeared around it, radiating scorching heat. I rushed outside. The 2 Minotaur guards flinched when they saw me. They still remembered the fireball explosion 3 days ago. I walked up to a new stone table that had replaced the one I destroyed, took a deep breath, and punched. The crack of breaking air was followed by a thunderous boom. The stone table exploded into pieces, fragments flying everywhere. Incredible! I couldn't help shouting. This was the first time I truly felt the power of a third-rank golden warrior. Even more impressive, I had managed to project battle energy onto my fist's surface, something most warriors couldn't do until 6th rank. It was only a thin layer, not true energy projection, but in a fight against someone my level, it was a massive advantage. It was like wearing invisible armor. Physical attacks simply wouldn't hurt me. But I forced myself to stay humble. I thought about Lade, who had been a 6th-rank warrior and still lost everything, including his life. This world was full of hidden masters who could crush me without effort. I had to stay low-key and keep training harder. Looking up, I spotted Skinny Monkey and Siskoff standing at a distance, waiting patiently. They had known I would come out eventually and were ready with their reports. The city still needed my attention. Skinny Monkey and Siskoff hurried over the moment I stepped out. They had been waiting for me with reports. Skinny Monkey went first. The guard force was complete, 1,000 men. Thanks to Siskoff's connections, they had recruited 30 level 1 warriors, including a swordsman named Hal who was famous at the mercenary guild for fighting 3 opponents at once. Even better, Monty the magic apprentice from Shuangha Town had heard about me and rushed to join us. Skinny Monkey had the idea to form a small magic squad, selecting 10 young people with magical talent from the city for Monty to train. He'd also cleared the refugees from the streets. Those willing to work were offered spots in the guard or sent to one village ridge with recruitment notices. Criminals went to prison. The remaining 1,000 or so refugees camped outside the walls under patrol watch. The only problem was weapons. Most of the existing swords were rusty and chipped, barely good enough for training. I gave immediate orders. All weapons from the armory would go to the guards. Skinny Monkey would build a 500-man crossbow unit within half a month. Siskoff would find experienced archery instructors. I also sent word for Doleig, GIs, and Charles to come to the mansion by noon the next day. Before they left, I asked about news from the Empire. Siskoff's intelligence was alarming. The Emperor had issued a decree. Any lord who captured territory held by orcs and defended it for 10 days could keep it permanently. The Empire was desperate. Tens of thousands of orc troops were camped 10 miles from the capital, locked in a standoff with the Royal Guard. The Empire couldn't spare forces for anywhere else. Worse, orc cavalry scouts had appeared 3 days ago outside our west gate. Only 20 riders on war wolves, but they had watched the city for half a day before leaving. A major attack was likely coming. I studied the wall map carefully. Siskoff explained that the Emperor's decree was a clever trap. Let ambitious lords fight the orcs and weaken both sides, then reclaim the land later through taxes. But for me, it was also a golden opportunity. South of us lay Qingshi Town, sitting on trade routes with rich iron and coal mines. Taking it would triple our territory. I ordered the formation of cavalry and scout units within a month. Blacksmiths would get double pay to work day and night producing weapons. Anyone who did outstanding work would earn 100 gold coins. I wanted constant surveillance on orc movements. After everyone left, I went back into seclusion to train the flame fist technique. 3 months passed. In those 3 months, I focused entirely on the flame fist and ignored magic training. Today I finally broke through to 5th rank warrior. My body now had 5 energy points, and battle energy flowed through me like cars on a highway. Wherever I directed it, it arrived instantly. After reaching 3rd rank, warriors could absorb ambient energy to sustain basic life functions, so I didn't starve during those 3 months. But when I stopped training, the hunger hit me hard. I walked outside and sat quietly at the stone table in the courtyard. The 2 Minotaur guards bowed. One stayed beside me while the other ran to notify everyone that I had come out. Soon they all arrived. Siskoff, Doleig, GIs, Skinny Monkey, Charles, Monty, and Sneeko One. My entire leadership team gathered in one place. Looking at them, I felt a wave of emotion. Just over 3 months in this world, and without really planning it, I had built this whole organization. Loyal people, real territory, serious wealth. Back in my old life, I was an ordinary person with no big ambitions. But now, with power and resources in my hands, my ambitions had grown far beyond anything I once imagined. I finished eating and leaned back in my chair, looking over my 12 key people gathered around the long table. 3 months of seclusion had made me sharper, and I wanted to hear everything that had happened. Skinny Monkey reported first. The 1,000-man guard force was now battle-ready. They could hold formation in heavy rain and march 100 miles in 3 days and still fight. The 500-man crossbow unit could fire in 3 rotating rows, filling the sky with arrows. 300 scouts were positioned across a 100-mile radius, with the farthest outpost near Lizardman territory. The only problem was cavalry. Of 30 war horses bought from the black market, 7 turned out to be lame old nags. Siskoff gave the financial report. Military spending had eaten through 30% of the treasury, but business was recovering. The locksmith shop had sold more chain mail to mercenaries in 1 month than in the previous half year. Monthly tax revenue was 10 gold coins, and the iron mine on Dragon Rise Mountain had tripled its output, with blacksmiths working day and night. He also shared troubling intelligence. Orc shamans had built altars on frozen rivers that could summon blizzards. 300 Imperial cavalry had frozen to death during a charge, found still in riding position. And lizardmen had started using poison bone arrows that turned victims' skin a sickly blue-black. Doleig had exciting news from one village ridge. Word had spread that a mercenary named Ryan had entered the 10,000 beast forest through our canyon pass and found magic crystals. Now the toll station at the canyon entrance had endless lines every day. Mercenaries were pawning family heirlooms just to pay the passage fee. The arrow towers we built were working perfectly. 3 levels of crossbows that could turn an armored rhino into a pincushion. Daily toll income alone was 2 gold coins, and the local tavern had hired 3 extra cooks. But he was worried. Patrol teams had found lizardman footprints by the river, 3 times the size of human feet, with sticky slime trails. Charles reported on construction. One village ridge's defenses were impressive now. Walls 3 zhong high embedded with iron spikes, with gaps for shooting arrows and pouring hot oil. The mountain pass towers had rolling stone traps on the ground floor, rotating crossbows on the 2nd level, and signal beacons on top. Stone roads stretched all the way to the forest entrance, lined with shops. Even merchants from the empire's south were coming with silk and spices. GIs had grown into a confident young woman. She reported the finances: 110 gold coins, 50 silver, and 2,012 copper coins on hand. Food reserves were dangerously low. Without Longxing City's support, one village ridge wouldn't survive winter. She had sent half the remaining refugees into trade caravans and workshops. The blacksmith shop now produced 10 swords a day, and the carpentry shop had wagon orders backed up until spring. I studied all their maps, ledgers, and models carefully. The lizardman movements near both locations worried me. This wasn't random. Someone was behind it. And the mercenaries' frenzy over magic crystals would eventually attract powerful enemies. I gave my orders. Starting tomorrow, all scouts would switch to night patrols focused on lizardman activity. For cavalry horses, I told them to find smugglers on the black market. Money was no issue. One village ridge's defenses needed more strengthening. Hire 500 laborers to dig 3 trenches outside the walls. As for the food shortage, I smiled with a hard edge. Send someone to the southern lords, I said. Tell them we have magic crystals and they have grain. There's no reason this deal shouldn't happen. After hearing everyone's reports, I made my decision. The biggest problem was that nobody had clear job boundaries. Responsibilities overlapped and things got messy. So I formally reassigned everyone's roles. Skinny Monkey became commander of Longxing City's guard force, 2,000 men including archers, cavalry, magic squad, and regular guards. Doleig would lead one village ridge's forces, also expanded to 2,000, with freedom to create his own scout, cavalry, and archer units. Jiai's became financial director for both territories, controlling all money coming in and going out. Siskov was named general manager of Longxing City, handling population records, trade, industry, farming, and law enforcement. Charles would oversee all construction across both territories. The 4 Minotaur brothers were promoted to captains of my personal guard, 400 elite soldiers protecting the mansion and me. Sneeko became deputy captain of the crossbow unit, and Monty became deputy captain of the magic squad. After the appointments, I asked Siskov to bring me a map of the Dragon Rise mountain range. We spread it across the stone table, and I studied it carefully. Longxing City, Shuanghe Town, and one village ridge sat in a line along the edge of the 10,000 Beast mountain range, which served as a natural wall. But to the east, where the Dragon Rise range met the endless swamp, things were more complicated. The Empire had built 4 fortress towns at 4 mountain passes to defend against the lizardmen, named Spring, Summer, Autumn, and Winter. Each fortress normally held 500 soldiers, 100 cavalry, 100 crossbowmen, and 300 sword and shield fighters, led by a commander ranked between 3rd and 5th level. I asked about their supply routes. Siskov said supplies didn't come through Longxing City, but through another canyon to the south. I traced the map southward and found it, Dragontail Valley, where the mountain range ended near the sea. I immediately ordered Skinny Monkey to send scouts to Dragontail Valley to investigate, and also to secretly gather intelligence on Shuanghe Town's military strength. Both missions were critical. With the meeting finished, everyone left to start their new duties. But what none of us knew was that at that very moment, a battle had already erupted at Dragontail Valley. At the valley's simple wooden gate, a few hundred terrified soldiers stared out at roughly 2,000 lizardmen surrounding their position. These creatures were nearly 2 meters tall, with thick legs, swinging tails, and cold reptilian eyes on ugly, oversized lizard heads. They carried crude but deadly weapons. A horrible shriek split the air, the attack signal. The lizardmen charged from all sides like a flood, their footsteps shaking the ground. The fortress commander screamed for his archers to fire. The first volley barely scratched the lizardmen's thick hides, leaving only shallow marks. The soldiers' hands started shaking. The commander yelled at them to draw their bows fully before releasing. The second volley hit harder. Over a dozen lizardmen fell. The soldiers' confidence grew slightly, and they fired again. The commander knew that if morale collapsed completely, the fortress wouldn't last an hour. They had bought some time, but the real danger was still coming. Whether they could hold Dragontail Valley remained an open question. While I was in my room practicing magic, a brutal battle was happening at Dragontail Valley, though I didn't know it yet. The lizardmen had attacked with 2,000 soldiers. Their commander was a massive creature, a full head taller than the others, wearing bone-plated armor and carrying a blood-stained war axe. He was furious that this tiny outpost had held out for a full day against his forces, costing him over 300 casualties. Before launching a final assault, he sent a human servant to demand surrender, promising the defenders safety and even letting their commander keep his post. But the fortress commander answered with an arrow straight through the messenger's skull. He wasn't interested in deals. He knew the Empire couldn't send help, and he'd already decided to retreat rather than let his remaining 100 soldiers die for nothing. As the lizardmen charged again, the commander ordered a full withdrawal into the Empire's interior. The lizardmen stormed in and found the fortress empty. Their commander raged about the cowardly humans, but was pleased to have taken the pass without losing more troops. My 2 scouts had been watching everything from a hill 500 meters away. One stayed behind to gather more details, while the other raced back to Longxing City on horseback. Meanwhile, I had been spending my days mastering a new spell, Fire Crow. It was a level 2 fire spell, weaker than the fireball, but much faster to cast and far cheaper on magic energy. With my current reserves, I could fire 8 fire crows in a row compared to only 2 fireballs. After days of practice, I finally got it right. A small crow-shaped flame formed in my palm, flapped its wings, and shot out the window, snapping a tree in half on impact. Decent power for everyday combat. Then Skinny Monkey knocked on my door with the scout's report. Dragontail Valley had almost certainly fallen. 2,000 lizard men had overwhelmed the defenders after a day of fighting. No Imperial reinforcements ever came. I frowned. 2,000 was a huge number for lizard men, who were normally too savage and disorganized to cooperate at that scale. Something had changed. Skinny Monkey added. That scattered reports from attacked merchant caravans suggested the lizard men planned to claim everything within the Dragon Rise mountain range as their hunting ground, our territory included. Their appetite is that big? I said, surprised. It didn't make sense. Lizard men were brutal loners who never united like this. Something was driving them. But I wasn't going to sit around waiting. I told Skinny Monkey I would personally go to Dragontail Valley to investigate. If there was a chance, I'd take the valley for ourselves. Skinny Monkey begged me not to go. Too dangerous. The lizard men were riding high after their victory. I laughed and waved him off. I wanted to test my new strength after months of training. And if things looked bad, I wouldn't be foolish enough to force a fight. Skinny Monkey asked how many men I wanted to take. I told him to pick 500 of his best from the guard force, plus my personal guard unit and Sneeko-Wen's crossbow squad. About 1,300 in total. Skinny Monkey would stay behind to protect Longxing City. This trip would also serve as real combat training for our newly formed army. This was my first time leading troops into battle. I wasn't sure I could win, but becoming a 5th-rank warrior had filled me with confidence. I couldn't waste this second life doing nothing. Ambition drives strength, and strength fuels ambition. A day later, the army was assembled. 1,300 soldiers stood before me, young faces full of energy, months of training giving them a sharp edge. It was an incredible feeling, commanding this many people who all answered to me. In my old world, this kind of thrill only existed in video games. I stood before them and asked 3 questions. Are you here just for food? They shouted no. Are you cowards? No. Do you want to be slaves? No. Good, I warned. The lizard men have taken Dragontail Valley. They slaughtered our soldiers and ate their bodies. Now it's time to take revenge and reclaim our land. The army erupted. Kill the lizard men. Take back our land. Over and over, the chant echoed off the city walls. When their blood was pumping, I shouted, move out, and the column began marching toward Dragontail Valley. Problems showed up quickly. At first the formation held, but after a few hours, the regular guards drifted into a sloppy mess. My personal guard unit, trained by the Minotaur brothers, stayed perfectly in line the entire time. I made a mental note. Those bullheaded brothers had a real talent for military discipline. I didn't correct the others yet. Now wasn't the time. After a full day's march, we were close to Dragontail Valley. Night fell, and I ordered camp. Sentries took positions on the surrounding high ground. Soon a sentry brought in a man they'd caught lurking near the column. The man claimed to be one of our scouts and pulled out a dragon-shaped token from his coat. I recognized it. Skinny Monkey had made these for our scout teams not long ago. Too new to be forged. The scout reported valuable intelligence. The fortress defenders had retreated before the lizardmen's final attack, so the lizardmen took the valley without a last fight. They had repaired the walls and defenses. But since lizardmen ate mostly meat, they received daily supply convoys from the northeast. He suggested we could use that supply line against them. I liked this man's sharp thinking. I promoted him to scout squad leader on the spot and gave him a gold coin. He knelt and swore to serve me faithfully. I gave the order immediately. The army would bypass Dragontail Valley and set up an ambush along the lizardmen's supply route to the north. The supply convoy wouldn't be heavily defended. The lizard men believed the Empire was too busy to bother with this area, and no single lord would dare challenge their 2,000-strong force. We circled around the valley and found a flat area to the north, then hid our troops and waited. The freezing night tested everyone's endurance, but the people of this world had strong bodies. Apart from the cold, nobody showed signs of weakness. As dawn broke and the sun climbed, I spotted them in the distance. a lizard man supply column heading toward Dragon Tail Valley from the west. My heart pounded. This was my first real battle as a commander, and the army's first real fight. I steadied my breathing and reminded myself to stay calm. This moment would prove what we were made of. I crouched behind thick bushes, fingers running along my sword handle, watching the lizard man supply convoy approach. About 103 of them, moving in a loose diamond formation, their dark green scales catching the sunlight. The lead scouts prodded the grass with bone spears as they walked. Just as I was about to signal the attack, a lizard man in the center of the column suddenly stood tall, its forked tongue flicking rapidly, sensing danger in the air. No more waiting. I ripped off the red cloth from my arm, the attack signal, and shouted for Sneeko when to fire. 500 crossbowmen rose from both hillsides at once. The twang of bowstrings sounded like rolling thunder as arrows filled the sky. But my heart sank when I saw the result. The lizardmen reacted with terrifying speed, using beast-hide shields and their own bodies to form a defensive wall. Only about a dozen fell. The rest just had scratched scales. Their defense was far stronger than I expected. I clenched my fists and forced myself to think clearly. I ordered a second volley at full draw and sent the Minotaur brothers to flank from both sides. No one was to escape. The second wave hit harder, dropping more lizardmen and shaking their formation. But when my infantry completed the encirclement, the surviving lizardmen had already locked into a tight circular defense, eyes burning with bloodlust, completely unafraid. Ox 1 charged first, swinging his 80-pound mountain-splitting axe. He took a lizardman's head clean off, green blood spraying across the dead grass. But then a shadow blocked his path. A massive lizard man, 3 meters tall, with dark brown scales covered in ridges, holding an iron club. Ox 1 swung his axe at its head. The giant didn't dodge. It simply raised its club. The impact was deafening. Ox 1's axe went flying, and he stumbled backward, blood pouring from his hands. This lizard man was at least third rank. Before I could react, the giant swung its club at Ox 1's shoulder. Ox 2 saved him by hurling his own axe to deflect the blow at the last second. But the giant recovered and aimed its next strike at Ox 1's skull. Everyone thought Ox 1 was dead, but I was already moving. My sword flashed silver through the air as I appeared between them, catching the iron club on my blade. The collision kicked up a cloud of dust. The giant stared at me in disbelief. This thin human had blocked its full-power strike. "You're not strong enough," I said with a cold smile, and twisted my wrist. The club flew from the lizardman's grip, and my blade kept going, slicing a half-meter gash across its chest. Dark red blood dripped onto the ground. It tried to fight back, but before it could move, my sword point was already at its throat. Everything went silent. The lizard man understood. One more twitch, and its head would leave its body. Seeing their leader captured, the other lizardmen's formation crumbled. The Minotaur brothers led a final charge. Within minutes, the surviving lizard men threw down their weapons and surrendered. I looked down at the giant lizard man, bound by my soldiers, and saw an opportunity. This creature was powerful, exactly the kind of fighter I needed for the battles ahead. "Monty," I called. "Draw a slave contract array now." Monty hurried forward, his staff tracing complex magical symbols on the ground. Blue light flowed from the tip, forming glowing runes. The lizard man tried to struggle, but the deep wound on its back had drained its strength. When the array was ready, I bit my finger and let blood fall into the center. Blinding light erupted, engulfing us both. The lizard man let out a pained roar. Then its eyes gradually dimmed until only obedience remained. The whole battle had lasted less than 30 minutes, but it taught me an important lesson. To survive on this dangerous continent, I needed more powerful warriors like this one. Looking at the bodies scattered across the ground, I felt a moment of regret, but it passed quickly. To hold Dragon Tail Valley and build a real elite army, these sacrifices were the price. I stood over the giant lizard man, my fingertip pressed against its forehead. The slave contract had worked, but the creature was in terrible shape. The sword wound on its chest was deep to the bone, black blood seeping out, its life force flickering like a dying candle. I had swung too hard in the heat of battle. "Monty, can you save it?" I called out, unable to hide my worry. A third-rank lizardman warrior was too valuable to lose. Monty pushed through the crowd, his apprentice robes wrinkled and dirty, but his eyes were sharp. He knelt beside the lizard man, placed his hands on its cold scales, and began chanting in an ancient, mysterious language. Then the miracle happened. Soft white light rose from Monty's palms like a gentle sunrise. The bleeding stopped instantly. Muscle and bone began mending before my eyes. Broken scales regrew with tiny clicking sounds. I could barely breathe. I had seen plenty of death in this world, but never anything like this. "Monty, you've been holding out on me." I slapped his shoulder, genuinely impressed. He grinned nervously and said his light element healing spell didn't always work. He'd just gotten lucky this time. But I could tell he was thrilled. I promoted him on the spot to commander of the magic squad, permanently. No matter what higher-ranked mages joined later, Monty would keep that title. He dropped to his knees, almost crying with gratitude. I ordered the healed lizard man taken to safety, then set my plan in motion. I sent soldiers to block every path out of Dragon Tail Valley, silently. Any lizard man that left the fortress would be killed without alerting the others. I wanted to starve them for a day before making my move. Meanwhile, the army would rest and eat. Just as we finished our meal, Ox 2 came back with a bound lizard man they'd caught leaving the fortress. As expected, it spoke no human language. I turned to Monty with a smile. "Time for another contract." Monty drew the magic array quickly. I bit my finger and completed the binding. This time, the lizard man offered zero resistance. The contract took hold instantly. Monty stared in disbelief. He knew that most mages could only maintain 1 or 2 slave contracts in a lifetime, and the process usually involved fierce mental resistance. Yet I had dozens of contracts and kept getting stronger. He was smart enough not to ask questions. The lizard man knelt before me. "Respected master, I am your slave, Cicero." I told him to stand and asked about Dragon Tail Valley's defenses. I could feel his mind struggling, the pain of betraying his own kind. But the contract's power was absolute. After a moment of resistance, he gave in and reported everything. 500 young, strong lizard men held the fortress. Their leader was a 4th-rank warrior who fought with a massive hammer and could shatter boulders. They had repaired the walls, making the valley easy to defend. For ranged weapons, they had some javelin throwers, but not many. No archers. Then I asked the question that made everyone hold their breath. "You attacked with 2,000. Where are the other 1,500? The camp went silent, all eyes on Cicero, waiting for his answer. I questioned the scout Cicero first. He told me their southern army had 5,000 lizard men total. They received orders to take Dragon Tail Valley quickly. After capturing it, the commander left 500 to guard the fortress and marched north with the rest. Cicero didn't know the exact destination. 5,000 troops, and 4,500 of them had moved north. That sent a chill through me. Could they be heading toward my territory? I rushed to the tent where the wounded 3rd-rank lizard man was recovering. When he finally woke, the slave contract held firm. His name was Zilialu, a centurion in charge of supply runs between the fortress and the lizard man homeland. I asked where the main force had gone. Zilialu said he didn't know the exact route, but he had overheard his superiors say that the Lizard King planned to destroy all 4 border fortresses without leaving a single survivor. After that, they would flatten every human territory north of the Dragon Rise Mountains and turn it into a new lizard man homeland. My blood went cold. Those 4 fortresses were humanity's last defensive line. If they fell, everything, including my lands, would be wide open. Even more alarming was that someone had managed to unite the normally chaotic lizard man tribes into a disciplined military force. This Lizard King was far more dangerous than anyone realized. I told Zilialu to rest and hinted that if he served me well, he might one day become the new Lizard King. His eyes went wide with excitement. I left the tent with a plan already forming. I sent Cicero back into Dragon Tail Valley as a spy. The fortress commander was furious that supplies hadn't arrived. His soldiers had gone hungry for a full day. Cicero lied smoothly, saying the supply team had minor trouble but would arrive by evening. The commander believed him. Then Cicero went to the wall guards and offered them 3 roasted chickens. The starving soldiers tore into the food greedily. What they didn't know was that the chickens were poisoned. Minutes later, they clutched their throats, convulsing, blood dripping from their mouths. Cicero felt a wave of guilt watching his former comrades die, but he pushed it down. He waved a red cloth in the air, the attack signal. My scouts saw it, and raced back to camp. I gave the order immediately. Move. The Minotaur brothers led the charge toward the gates, heavy armor gleaming, war axes ready. Cicero had already opened the doors. My soldiers poured into Dragon Tail Valley like a flood. A patrolling lizard man spotted us and screamed a warning. An arrow took him through the skull, but his cry had been enough. Lizard men burst from their tents with weapons drawn, eyes blazing with fury. Even after a day without food, they fought hard. These swamp-born creatures were fast and vicious, using claws, fangs, and terrain to inflict real casualties on my troops. The clash of metal, screams of pain, and roars of rage filled the valley. I launched fireballs from above, setting ablaze any lizard men who tried to reach the gate. My magic bought time for more soldiers to flood in. Gradually, the tide turned in our favor, though the lizard men kept fighting in small groups, making us pay for every meter. By the time I walked into the valley, bodies littered the ground. Blood mixed with mud formed dark red streams. Cicero ran up to me, covered in blood, some his, mostly theirs. Master, we control most of the valley. Only the lizard man commander and a few fighters are holding out in the main fort. My eyes lit up. After fighting Zilialu, I understood how valuable real combat experience was. A fourth-rank lizard man commander would be the perfect challenge to test myself further. Take me to him, I said, gripping my sword and walking toward the fort. I walked through pools of blood toward the main platform where the lizard man commander waited. The sight around him was horrifying. Over a dozen of my soldiers lay dead, torn apart by his claws. The Minotaur brothers were down too. Ox 2 had a broken arm. Ox 3 had a bone spike buried in his chest. Ox 4 was holding his guts in with both hands. They looked at me with guilt and relief. The lizard man commander was terrifying. 2.5 meters tall, muscles like ancient tree roots, half-foot claws glowing blue in the fading light. He smashed a stone pillar in half with one swipe and roared so loud it hurt everyone's ears. I raised my hand to calm my soldiers. I offered the commander a chance to serve me, promising wealth and power. He threw his head back and laughed, mocking me as a weak human. He said the Lizard King would destroy us all and restore the lizard men to their former glory. Then he pointed a claw at my throat and dared me to fight him one-on-one. I narrowed my eyes. Magic energy exploded from my body, cracking the stone beneath my feet. I shot forward like an arrow, faster than the eye could follow. My great sword was already drawn, its magic runes glowing blue, slicing through the air toward his neck. He barely reacted in time, throwing up his claws to block. But my strike carried everything I had, strength and magic combined. The blade cut through his legendary scales like butter and severed his neck cleanly. His head fell and bounced across the stone floor. His body stood for a moment, then crashed down, shaking the entire platform. Silence. Then my soldiers erupted. Lord is mighty. Lord is mighty. The chant rolled through the valley like thunder. I raised my sword to answer them. Sunset light turning me golden. I announced rewards. 1 silver coin for every soldier who fought. 1 gold coin for every officer. The cheering was deafening. I ordered 3 days of rest in Dragon Tail Valley. Later, sitting in the wrecked command room, I thought hard about what this battle had revealed. My army's biggest weakness was clear. We had almost no high-level fighters. Every time we faced a strong enemy, I had to handle it personally. That couldn't continue. I called Monty and asked if there was a fast way to raise warriors' strength. He thought carefully, then explained that an energy-gathering magic array could multiply the speed at which warriors absorbed power. But it required expensive magic crystals and needed a high-level mage to draw it. At least level 2, though 3 or 4 would be much safer. A level 2 mage might not have enough power to complete the array in one go, and any interruption could make it unstable and dangerous. Then it hit me. I was a level 2 mage myself, with mental power far beyond normal. Maybe I could draw it. I asked Monty if he had any books on magic arrays. He pulled out an old, worn magic text that happened to contain instructions for the energy-gathering array. I handed him a level 2 magic crystal as a reward, far more valuable than the book. His eyes went wide with shock and gratitude. After he left, I sat under candlelight studying every word and diagram. The array worked by using mithril to draw specific patterns that gathered ambient energy and compressed it at the center. Simple in theory, but the actual drawing required absolute precision. Every line's length and angle, every connection point had to be perfect. One mistake and the whole thing would fail, or worse, harm anyone training inside it. I knew the difficulty, but to strengthen my army and protect my territory, I had no choice. I had to try. By candlelight, I studied the magic array instructions carefully. The array used 8 focal points that worked together to gather ambient energy and channel it into one person, essentially giving them the equivalent of 8 people's daily training in a single session. The growth would increase exponentially over time. My first thought was obvious. What if I doubled the focal points to 16? But the next line in the book crushed that idea. 8 was the absolute limit the human body could handle. Any more, and the energy would tear the person apart from the inside. I broke into a cold sweat, grateful I hadn't tried it. The diagram showed an 8-pointed shape with lines connecting each corner to the center, divided into 8 equal sections, all interconnected like a complex spider web. The entire array had to be drawn in one continuous session with perfectly consistent line thickness. Any flaw would cause energy leaks or even explosions. The bigger the array, the more powerful, but also harder to draw. Looking at the design, I thought it seemed manageable, basically an elaborate octagon. But then I hit a problem. What was mithril? I had no idea. Monty was still in the room, so I asked him. He explained that mithril was the main material for drawing magic arrays, found mostly in deserts, some in the beast forest, and also in the endless swamp. I got annoyed. None of those places were ours. But then he casually mentioned he had enough mithril stored in his spatial ring for several arrays. I nearly strangled him for burying the lead. I handed him 100 gold coins for the mithril. He tried to refuse, saying mithril wasn't that expensive, but I insisted. Then I sent him outside to guard the door. Alone, I placed 8 magic beast crystals at the 8 compass points around the room, the Lizardman commander's quarters, nearly 100 square meters, plenty of space. I floated the mithril into the air with my mind and lit a fire beneath it. After about an hour, the mithril began to melt. Not knowing the proper technique, I started drawing before it fully liquefied. This turned out to be an accidental breakthrough. Partially melted mithril was actually easier to control, allowing more precise lines. Using my mental power, I guided thin mithril threads like silver snakes, connecting the 8 focal points. The pattern spread toward the center in a beautiful rhythm, lines weaving and intersecting until they all met perfectly in the middle. A soft hum filled the room. The array was complete. I stared in disbelief. I had succeeded on my very first attempt. Only a properly functioning array produced that sound. But then doubt crept in. Everything had gone too smoothly. Would it actually work? Would it be safe? I needed a test subject, someone other than myself. The Minotaur brothers were all injured. Monty was a mage, not a warrior. Then the name hit me. Sneakowen. He was loyal, strong, and stuck at peak first rank for 2 years without breaking through. But using him as a guinea pig when I wasn't sure the array was safe? That felt wrong. Before I could decide, I called for someone, and Sneakowen himself walked through the door. Monty had apparently asked him to stand guard before going off to absorb his new magic crystal. I asked Sneakowen his current level. He looked embarrassed and said he'd been stuck at peak first rank for 2 full years with no sign of breaking through. I made my decision. I told him straight. There was an opportunity in front of him that could push him to second rank, but it came with serious danger. It might work, or it might kill him. He dropped to his knees without a second's hesitation. Of course, a warrior's whole life is the pursuit of greater strength. Even if death waits ahead, I'm willing to try. Please, my lord, give me this chance. His voice echoed through the room, full of courage and resolve. I told Sneakowen to sit in the center of the magic array and relax. He closed his eyes and began circulating his inner energy like normal training. After his 7th cycle, the 8 crystals at the array's corners lit up simultaneously, releasing pure energy that flowed toward him like fine rain. At first, it was gentle, thin streams of power seeping through his skin into his channels, wrapping around the stagnant core in his belly. He hadn't felt anything like this in 2 years of being stuck at peak first rank. He pushed harder, guiding the foreign energy to merge with his own. Within minutes, the trickle became a flood. Energy poured in like a broken dam, hammering against his inner core. The core trembled, its dull surface brightening. Then came a soft pop inside him. His core suddenly expanded, its patterns becoming crystal clear. He had broken through to second rank, but the energy kept coming, pushing toward third rank. The flood grew too violent, raging through his channels like wild horses. His core swelled dangerously, hairline cracks appearing on its surface. Sweat poured down his face, his body shaking, consciousness teetering on the edge. "Enough!" I shouted, pulling one crystal from its position. All 8 nodes went dark instantly. I told him to slowly settle the chaotic energy and stabilize. It took him a full 15 minutes before he could open his eyes. He collapsed forward onto the ground and swore his life to me. I laughed and told him the truth. This was my first time using the array, and I had no idea if it would work. He was my test subject. He didn't care. He said being my test subject was an honor. In Longsheng City, people trained for 10 years without breaking through, and I had done it for him in 1 hour. He pledged absolute loyalty, swearing to accept any punishment if he ever disobeyed. I sent him away to rest and stabilize his new level, then collapsed onto my bed. Drawing the array had drained my mental energy completely, but I couldn't stop smiling. It worked. This energy-gathering array was a treasure. With enough materials, I could upgrade my entire army. I dragged myself to the Minotaur brothers' tent. The smell of herbal medicine was overwhelming. Ox 2, 3, and 4 were unconscious, wrapped in blood-stained bandages. Only Ox 1 was awake, propped up in bed, drowning in guilt. He begged me to punish him for failing against the Lizardman commander. I told him to stop being ridiculous. He was peak second rank fighting a mid-third rank enemy. Surviving that long was impressive. Then I hinted that once they healed, I would show them what real power meant. Ox 1's eyes went wide. "You mean, you can help us level up?" I smiled and told him to focus on healing first. He'd understand soon enough. When I left, I could see the fire burning in his eyes. The promise of power was the best medicine. I fell asleep the moment I hit my bed, but I was jolted awake by urgent shouting at my door. A guard rushed in with terrible news. Skinny Monkey had sent word that the Mage Guild had gathered nearly 1,000 fighters and surrounded Longsheng City. They were threatening to burn the entire city to ashes with fire magic if we didn't surrender within 3 days. All sleepiness vanished. I stood up and stared out the window. The Mage Guild again. Why were they so obsessed with a border city like Longsheng? The guard added that the leader was the same fire mage from before, now accompanied by several guild members who looked high-ranked. I drummed my fingers on the windowsill, thinking hard. Then I told the guard to fetch Monty. It was time to show the Mage Guild that Longsheng City was no easy target. I called Monty to my room and told him what Skinny Monkey had reported. The Mage Guild had surrounded Longsheng City again, threatening to burn everything if we didn't surrender in 3 days. I asked Monty why the guild was so obsessed with our city. His answer made everything click. The Mage Guild operated legally in every country except the Dairy Empire. When the empire was founded, the guild had supported the royal family's enemies. After winning, the emperor declared the guild illegal and banned all their operations on imperial soil. Individual mages were still allowed, but the organization itself was outlawed. Monty believed the guild wanted to establish a base in Longsheng City to grow their influence inside the empire. I took the idea further. What if the guild was actually helping the orcs defeat the empire? The orc army and the imperial forces were currently deadlocked, but if the Mage Guild tipped the scales, the empire could fall. Destroying the nation that had been their enemy for generations would be the ultimate revenge. Monty asked if we should abandon Longsheng City. I told him absolutely not. I would never give up what I had taken. But I was puzzled. Where were the guild's people coming from? We controlled both Longsheng City and Dragontail Valley, and we hadn't seen any guild members passing through. Monty suddenly remembered something. Back when he lived in Shuanghe Town, he had noticed strangers regularly visiting the mayor's residence, people who weren't locals. Now it made sense. The Mage Guild had been working with the Shuanghe Town mayor all along. The guild was probably gathering refugees from around the town and turning them into their makeshift army. That explained everything. Taking Shuanghe Town would cut off the guild's supply line. But I was spread too thin. Dragontail Valley still needed securing. The 4 border fortresses were an open question, and now this. I gave my orders. The Minotaur brothers and my personal guard would stay at Dragontail Valley to defend it while they healed. I removed all the magic array crystals from the room. Without me supervising, Using the array could kill the brothers if anything went wrong. Everyone else would march to Longxing City. I sent Monty ahead with the third-rank lizard man to scout Shuanghe town. If possible, take control of it. If not, at least map out the guild's presence there. That left me with only Sneeko 1, now peaked second rank, as my strongest fighter. The next afternoon, we reached the outskirts of Longxing City. A crowd of ragged refugees blocked our path. A man in a mage's robe stepped forward and shouted that he wanted to negotiate with Lord Richard. I didn't bother responding personally. I told Sneeko 1 to deliver my message, surrender now and live, or die to the last man. I specifically warned the refugees that I had shown them mercy once before, and joining the guild this time would make their current position their permanent grave. The mage in the robe looked shaken but tried to act tough. He began chanting a spell, thinking he was safe at that distance with no one able to reach him. But I could see the magic ripples forming around his body. A second-rank mage's senses don't miss that. He had made a critical mistake. He was standing in front of his army with no magical shield, assuming no one could threaten him from this far away. I turned to Sneeko 1. Hit him with everything you've got. One shot. He has no protection up. Sneeko 1 didn't hesitate for a single heartbeat. He pulled his bow from his back, drew it to full capacity, poured every ounce of his newly upgraded power into the arrow, and released it toward the mage 100 meters away. Sneeko 1 released his arrow with everything he had. It screamed through the air toward the mage 100 meters away. The mage sensed the danger halfway through. His spiritual power was stronger than a normal person's. But he was at the critical point of his spell chant. He faced an impossible choice: stop chanting and suffer magical backlash that could destroy his mind, or ignore the arrow and take a fatal hit. His focus broke. The half-formed spell went wild. The explosion was massive. The magical backlash detonated like a bomb, killing the mage and dozens of people around him instantly. Sneeko 1's arrow hadn't even reached him. The mage had killed himself with his own magic. I laughed out loud. I couldn't believe our luck. I turned to my soldiers and shouted that this was the great mage guild's power. A mage who couldn't even control his own spell and blew up his own people. Nothing to fear. I ordered everyone to charge. 1,000 soldiers surged forward. The refugees on the other side had already lost all will to fight after watching their mage explode. They scattered and ran without putting up any resistance. We pushed through easily. But as we approached the city gates, a unit of knights in guild uniforms rushed out to block us. Their captain rode to the front, arrogant and loud, demanding to know which one of us was Richard and telling me to step forward to die. Before I could respond, Sneeko 1 fired 2 arrows at him. The knight captain was fast. He sliced the first arrow out of the air with his great sword and blocked the second with a small round shield. Sneeko 1 realized this man was at least third rank and fell back into our formation. The knight captain grew even more arrogant, mocking us for only knowing sneak attacks. Then he charged alone toward our entire army on horseback, planning to take my head personally. I had to admire his courage, even if it was foolish. But once again, I had nobody strong enough to handle him except myself. I decided to see what a guild knight was really made of. I ran forward on foot to meet him. When we closed in, he swung his great sword at my head from horseback. Fighting on foot against a mounted rider put me at a disadvantage, so instead of blocking, I dodged his swing and threw my sword at his horse's front leg. The blade hit perfectly. The horse screamed, lost its balance, and crashed face first into the ground. The knight leaped off gracefully, landing on his feet. "So you're Richard," he said. "Didn't expect you to dodge my strike. That swing was so weak." I shot back. "Did some woman drain all your strength last night?" He went red with fury. A lord saying something so crude in public was more than his pride could handle. He charged me with wild rage, his sword dancing in a disorienting pattern, some kind of confusion technique that made it impossible to predict where the real attack would come. I stood perfectly still and watched him come. Sneeko 1 was panicking behind me, wondering if I'd frozen up. But I knew what I was doing. I had beaten a 4th-rank lizard man at Dragontail Valley. This knight was 3rd rank at best. He thought his technique was working, that I couldn't tell where his strike would land. When he reached attack range, he committed everything to a downward slash at my skull. At the last possible moment, I moved. One swing upward. Our swords collided with a deafening clang. The impact sent his weapon flying from his hands. Only then did he realize he was completely outmatched. My blade kept moving. It punched through his armor, through his chest, and out his back. He stared down at the sword sticking through him, face frozen in disbelief. When I pulled the blade free, he crumpled to the ground. Then a new voice called out from behind the enemy lines. "Lord Richard, impressive moves. You killed our third-rank mage and our third-rank knight. Now let me test your skills personally."